Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour et merci de vous être libérés pour joindre ce
Thank you
rendez-vous
for finding
donné
time
pour
for this
recevoir.
appointment
Si vous êtes ici,
of
c'est que
giving
vous
and
êtes de bonne
receiving. If you are
intention.
here, it's because you
Webinaire sur
belong
le
here.
financement des
A
engrais
webinar
et de la
on
chaîne de
the
valeur des
financing
engrais.
of
Thème,
fertilizers
financement
and
du
fertilizer
secteur
value
des
chain.
engrais en Afrique,
The topic
défis et
is
pistes de solutions.
challenges and
Nous sommes tous
opportunities.
concernés par la
We are all
sécurité
aware
alimentaire et
of
nutritionnelle.
food and nutrition
Et nous savons
security
les
in Africa
difficultés qui entravent le
and the
secteur de
challenges that
l'agriculture
undermine agricultural
africain.
sector in
Changement
Africa. Climate
climatique,
change,
pauvreté des sols,
soil poverty,
difficultés d'accès au
challenging in
financement du secteur.
accessing
Et
finance
ce
in the
dernier est un
industry.
véritable boulot de
And this
formation.
latter is a
Nous essaierons
bottleneck.
donc au cours de ce
So
rendez-vous
during
de
this meeting,
réfléchir
we will
afin de
think
trouver des
in depth
solutions
to come up
potentielles
with
ou
potential
surtout des
solutions
pistes
or
de
approaches
solutions.
of
Alors,
solutions.
nous allons maintenant, si vous le
With your
permettez,
permission,
entrer
we are
dans le
now
vif
going to
du
dive
sujet.
into our
Et
real
avant de
business.
continuer, j'aimerais
Before you
inviter
continue, I would
les
like to ask
participants,
all
les
the
panélistes
participants,
qui
all
sont
the
en
panelists
ligne
that
à bien
are
vouloir cliquer sur
connected
l'icône
to
interprétation en
choose
bas de
the
l'écran.
language
Cliquez
interpretation.
l'icône interprétation
Below
et
your screen, you
choisir
will
votre
see
canal.
interpretation and
Si vous
kindly
décidez de
choose your
concentrer
channel.
sur le
If you
français
want to
ou si vous
listen
voulez
to the
écouter
webinar in
l'anglais,
French,
cliquez
just click
sur
French or
l'anglais.
English
Et
if that
autre
is the case.
information, durant ce
During
webinaire,
this
les
webinar,
panélistes peuvent mettre
the speakers
leurs
can
informations,
send
leurs
their
questions, apports ou
questions,
suggestions
contributions,
dans
or
le chat
suggestions
que vous
into the
trouverez
chat
aussi.
box.
Alors, voilà ainsi planté le
So
décor.
now
Nous allons donc
the
entrer dans
stage
le
is
vif du
set.
sujet.
Let us get the
Et
ball
pour
rolling.
inviter le chef de
Let me
projet
invite
Feed the
the
Future
COP of Feed the
Engrais,
Future
implémenté
Angre,
par IFDC
implemented
et
by
financé par
IFDC,
l'USAID,
funded by
Monsieur
USAID,
Yul, Dr. Yul
Dr.
Sanson,
Yul
qui est en
Sansan.
ligne avec nous. Dr.
Dr.
Yul
Yul
Sanson, vous avez
Sansan,
donc la parole
you
pour
have the
votre
floor
mot de
for your
bienvenue.
opening remark. Thank you.
Merci
Thank
Claire,
you, Claire.
j'espère que tu
I
m'entends
hope you
bien
can all hear me.
Très bien.
et que, et que la traduction aussi
The
est
English
bonne.
speakers, are you receiving the
Bonjour
interpretation?
à toutes et à
Good
tous
morning,
ceux
ladies
qui
and
sont en
gentlemen.
ligne. Comme Claire l'a dit, je suis
My
Sansanyo,
name
je
is
suis
Sansan
ici au
Yul.
bureau
I'm
du
here
FDC
in the
à Accra,
IFDC
au Ghana.
office in Accra, Ghana.
Et nous sommes heureux de vous avoir sur ce webinaire. Nous
It's a
sommes
privilege
déjà
for us to welcome
109
you
personnes,
in
donc
this
l'occasion
webinar.
est vraiment
Right
bonne
here,
de
we have
démarrer et nous avons
109
prévu à
participants,
9 heures.
and it's
Alors,
five
sur
past
ce,
nine. We can
merci donc
therefore
à
start
toutes
our
et à
meeting.
tous ceux qui sont en
Once
ligne. Je
again,
voudrais,
thanks to all
à mon nom
the
propre déjà,
participants.
et au nom des responsables hiérarchiques,
In my
notamment
name and
le
on
chef du
behalf of
département énergie
my
impact de IFDC, Dr.
hierarchy
Boka, qui probablement est en ligne
and
à table.
also of my
Aussi,
hierarchy,
nos camarades,
Mr.
la
Alemboka,
vice-présidente
and the
de
vice
IFDC
chair
pour les
of
projets et les
IFDC,
programmes qui est aussi en ligne
who
et
is
aussi au
also
nom de notre
connected, and
président
also on
directeur
behalf of
Henk,
our director, Dr.
souhaiter
Henk,
la
I would like
bienvenue
to welcome
à tous
you
et à
all
toutes à ce webinaire de
to
ce
this
17 novembre
webinar today,
2023
17th of November
sur le
2023,
financement du secteur des engrais
on
en
the
Afrique de
financing
l'Ouest,
of West
défis et
Africa
pistes de
financing
solutions.
in the
Donc,
fertilizer
vous l'aurez
industry.
compris, c'est un
Challenges.
webinaire qui est
As
organisé
you know, this
par
is
IFDC,
organized by
justement
IFDC
dans le cadre de son
under
projet
the
Feed the
framework
Future,
of Feed the
Enhancing
Future,
Growth,
enhancing
Sustainable
growth
Agricultural Input
and
System et
agricultural
en français,
system,
nous disons stimuler la
enhancing
croissance par un
growth
système
through
régional
regional
d'intrants
input
agricoles.
system.
Bien entendu, ce
This
webinaire
webinar
est organisé en
is
étroite
organized
collaboration avec l'Association
in
ouest-africaine
collaboration
des professionnels
with
des
West
engrais
African
WAFA
Fertilizer Association,
et
WAFA.
ATEX Africa. Donc, comme vous le
So
savez
as
déjà
you
aussi,
know,
certainement, Engrais est un projet
ANGRE is a
régional
regional
qui
project
couvre les 15 pays de la CEDEAO en plus de la
covering the
République du
15
Tchad
countries of
et
ECOWAS in
de sept
addition to
pays.
Mauritania and Chad,
Engrais
making
est
it
financé
together
par
17
la
countries.
division
And this
régionale
is
de
funded
l'USAID
by USAID
basée ici
regional
à Accra.
office
Et
in
rapidement,
Accra.
mesdames,
So
messieurs,
in a
pour vous
nutshell, ladies
faire
and
part
gentlemen,
des
To
objectifs.
give
Donc, le
you the
but de
aim
l'engrais, c'est
of
de
or the objective of the
contribuer
project
à accroître
is to
durablement
contribute in
la production
sustainably
agricole et la sécurité
providing
alimentaire en Afrique
food,
de l'Ouest.
therefore
Et
food
spécifiquement,
security in West
Engrais
Africa.
vise à accroître
Engrais
durablement la
project
disponibilité et
would also like
l'utilisation
to
raisonnable
increase the
des
availability,
engrais adaptés
affordability
et à des
of
prix
fertilizer
favorables,
in
accessibles à tous les
fertilizers
producteurs
and make it
souvent
accessible
d'Afrique
to
de l'Ouest.
millions of
Et
producers in
nous
West
avons
Africa.
un point particulier, un
So
regard
we
particulier
also
sur
have a
les femmes
focus on
et
women and
les jeunes.
youth.
Alors, c'est
Just to
dire
tell
que
you that
justement, pour atteindre ces
to
objectifs,
reach our
Engrais ne peut que
objective,
travailler avec
Angre
WAFA,
can
qui est
only
vraiment un
work
partenaire
with
clé
WAFA, who
du
is a key
dispositif.
partner
Alors, rapidement,
in this
pour parler du
channel.
projet, nous avons démarré en
We started
2018
in 2018,
et rappelez-vous, en 2019,
and
déjà
by
décembre,
December
nous étions dans la
2018,
crise du
2019, we
coronavirus
were already
de
facing
2019
coronavirus crisis,
et à la suite de laquelle il y a eu
following
des effets
which we
cascadiques
had
qui ont
post-COVID
fortement affecté le monde entier,
challenges.
y compris le secteur des engrais. Et
And very
immédiatement,
quickly,
rappelez-vous, en
in
2021, la crise,
2021,
l'augmentation du prix
the
du gaz qui a
increase
aussi
of the fuel
affecté le prix
price
des engrais.
that has
Et donc,
also
pour ne rien
affected the
arranger, depuis
fertilizer
2022, vous voyez
prices.
qu'il y a
And
cette
since
guerre entre la
2022,
Russie et
just to
l'Ukraine
exacerbate the
qui
situation, we
vient
have
encore
the
aggraver
war
la
between
situation.
Ukraine
Alors,
and
somme
Russia.
toute, au jour d'aujourd'hui, où est-ce que nous en
All in
sommes?
all,
La situation des engrais en Afrique de l'Ouest,
fertilizer situation in
d'abord
West
la
Africa
disponibilité.
faces some
Alors,
issues.
si on regarde
First,
un peu
the
ce que disent les
availability.
analystes,
According to the
les
analysis,
années 2021 et 2022
2021,
étaient vraiment des années de
2022,
perturbation, mais actuellement, le
we have known
marché
some
commence à montrer
disruption,
un retour
but
à la
now
normale.
things are going back
Donc,
to
ce qu'on
the
observe
normal
maintenant, c'est un
trend.
peu une certaine
So we
stabilité
have a kind
dans
of
le secteur
stability in the
et on a
industry.
l'offre et la demande qui sont
And
plus ou
we
moins
also
ajustées,
have the
ce
demands
qui fait que
that
nous
are
avons moins de
going back to the
pression sur
normal. So we
l'approvisionnement.
have less
Alors,
pressure
il faut dire
on
aussi que
the
cette stabilité relative est
procurement.
attribuée à la baisse
I
des
can
prix
say
sur le
that this
marché
is related
international
to the
qui a
decrease
également
of
influencé
the
notre sous-région.
prices.
Alors, qu'en est-il du financement? On a
What
pu le
about the
rappeler dans les termes de référence
financing?
que
In
le
the
financement
TOR, you will see
constitue
that the
un des
financing
nœuds
is
étranglement.
one
C'est
of the
vraiment
bottlenecks
une des
and one
difficultés
of the major
majeures.
challenges we
Et
know.
conscient de ça, si vous vous rappelez, en
And due to
2006, au
that,
sommet du chef
during the
d'État à Abuja,
2006
avait initié le
Head of
mécanisme
State Summit
AFDC de
in
la BAD.
Abuja,
Et donc, ce
together
mécanisme a
with
connu aussi une
AFDB, we have come
opérationnalisation.
up we came
Il y
up
a
with a
aussi d'autres
mechanism.
mécanismes, notamment avec la CEDEAO, vous vous rappelez la banque de la CEDEAO, la BEDC, et il y a aussi des approches par la Banque mondiale, ainsi que d'autres initiatives qui ont
And
vu le
also
jour,
some other
mais avec plus
initiatives
ou moins de succès un peu
with some
mitigés.
limited
Alors,
success.
bien sûr, les acteurs de la
Yes,
région ne sont pas
the
restés les bras
stakeholders in the
croisés. Il
region
y a beaucoup de
did
réunions
not
d'experts,
stay
il y a
still.
beaucoup de
They had
dialogues
many
fondateurs, des forums, des
dialogues,
ateliers sur le sujet.
stakeholders
Et
forum
la bonne
on the
nouvelle, il y a aussi
issue,
des expériences
and
nombreuses et variées
we
qui
have
ont
many
plus ou moins
lessons,
réussi, que ce soit au niveau des pays ou au
either at
niveau
country
de la
level
région.
or the region
Cependant,
level.
force est de
It's
constater
obvious
que
that
la
the
problématique du
issue
financement des
of
engrais reste
fertilizer
toujours
funding is still
d'actualité.
a topical issue.
Voilà vraiment une
So
des
this
raisons
this
qui
is
font que
one of the reasons
l'IFDC,
why
à travers son
IFDC
projet
through
Engrais
Angre
aujourd'hui,
project
en
today
étroite
is
collaboration,
working
comme je dis,
closely
avec
with
WAFA et
WAFA and
ATES,
ATES.
m'entreprise de vous
They
convier
deem it
à ce
important to
webinaire.
welcome you here to
Et
this
donc,
webinar.
bien
So
sûr
I
que ce
believe that
webinaire,
this
rappelez-vous
webinar
aussi, le contexte est
is
vraiment
also
la région vient
aligned
de se
with the
doter
regional
récemment
context
de
in
sa
which
feuille de
that we
route
have a
sur les
regional
engrais
roadmap
et la
on
santé des sols.
fertilizers and
Donc,
soil
ce
health.
qui fait que ce webinaire arrive vraiment à point
This
nommé
webinar
pour nous
is a
permettre
timely
désormais
one.
d'échanger et de
It's an
partager nos
opportunity for us
expériences
to exchange,
sur
to
les défis
discuss
du
on
financement
the
des engrais
financing
dans la région,
issues pertaining
sur
to
les
fertilizer in the
mécanismes
region,
probants
and
d'accès au
also on
financement
the
dans la région
successful
pour les engrais,
mechanism
mais
for
aussi,
availability
et très
of
important, fournir
fertilizers
des
in the
ressources et
region.
conseils
So this is
pratiques,
also the
n'est-ce pas,
opportunity for
pour
us to
que
share
les acteurs
lessons,
puissent résoudre
experiences.
leurs préoccupations.
So
Mesdames,
ladies and
Messieurs,
gentlemen,
c'est dire que nous attendons
what
de ce
I mean
webinaire
is
le
that we
partage des
just want
bonnes
to share
pratiques
the best
de
practices with
financement
you,
diffusables immédiatement, donc que les acteurs
financing,
pourront s'approprier.
availability, and
Je
other
mettrai en
issues.
présent
So
clair. Mais avant de terminer,
before I close my
je voudrais
speech,
encore une
I
fois,
would like
au
to,
nom des autorités de
on behalf
l'IFDC que
of
j'ai mentionné plus haut, et en mon nom
IFDC's
propre, remercier
leaders, I would
l'ensemble
like to
des
thank all
participants
the
à ce webinaire
participants of
pour leur disponibilité
this
à participer,
meeting.
bien sûr,
Thanks for
et
your
toutes leurs
availability,
contributions.
for your
Je voulais
contributions
aussi
also.
remercier
I would
tous les
also like to
représentants
thank all the
de la région,
representatives
notamment de la
of the
commission de la
region,
CEDEAO, du
ECOWAS
gouvernement, du
Commission,
secrétariat
UMOA, the
exécutif du
Executive
SILS,
Secretariat of SEALS,
l'ensemble des autres
and also
partenaires, quels sont
all
les partenaires
the
aujourd'hui
regional,
sur la
national,
conférence. Je ne vais
and
pas
local
citer au
partners.
risque
I don't want to call them
de
one by one.
m'écorcher. Je
I
remercie vivement
also
d'avance les
thank
panélistes
the
qui
panelists who are
partagent
here
avec
to
nous toute
share
leur
their
expertise.
expertise with us.
À l'endroit de l'USAID particulièrement,
And
je dirais que oui, nous sommes bien
on
contents
behalf of
d'avoir cette
IFDC,
extension de 3 ans
we
qui
are
vient
very
aussi permettre
glad,
aux
if
projets
not
en vrai
happy,
qui
to
au
say
départ
that we
étaient
have an
initialement de 5 ans,
extension of
maintenant elle est
3 years.
3 ans. Cela nous
So we
permet
just
donc de
finished with the
vraiment
5 year
aller à
project,
l'échelle
and we have
avec
an
l'ensemble
extension of 3 years,
parties du
which will
projet.
help us
Enfin, à notre
capitalize the
partenaire
various
habituel,
lessons we have learned in
c'est-à-dire
this.
WAFA,
And
merci
together
beaucoup
with
pour cette
WAFA,
collaboration
thank you for
étroitissante
this
qui, en tout cas, on
frank
l'espère, va nous amener toujours à
collaboration.
plus
And
de
we
succès
believe that we are going, we are heading for more success.
C'est sur ce que donc je souhaite
To
plein
conclude, I
succès
would
à
like
notre
to
webinaire
wish
et
us
je vous
fruitful
remercie vraiment pour
deliberations.
votre
And thank you
aimable
for your kind
à
attention.
toi.
Over, madam.
Merci
Thank you,
infiniment, Dr.
Dr.
Yul
Yul
Sanson, pour
Sanson,
ce mot
for your
introductif.
introductory
Merci infiniment.
remark.
Je voudrais juste
I would just like
rappeler que
to
chaque
tell you
panéliste,
that
après
each
avoir fini de
panelist,
parler, veuille bien couper la
right
caméra et
after
son
your
micro pour permettre
intervention,
de
kindly
l'utiliser
switch
donc
off your
de
microphone
discussion.
and your camera
Merci
just to
infiniment.
allow us
Il y
to
a
have
un
a
lien
fluent
YouTube
communication on WhatsApp.
qui va être
In the
partagé dans le
meantime, we
chat.
have a
Je voudrais
YouTube
envoyer à
link
des gens
which will be
qui voudraient
shared
suivre ce webinaire en
in the
direct
chat box.
sur
Kindly share it
YouTube.
with people who would
Merci
like to be
infiniment. Alors,
connected
nous allons
via
poursuivre à
YouTube.
présent avec la deuxième
Now let's go to
personne
the
qui va
second
dire un mot également sur le
speaker,
sujet à aborder. Il s'agit de Monsieur
Mr.
Malik
Malik
Niang
Nyang
de WAFA,
from
justement
WAFA.
notre partenaire. Monsieur
Mr.
Malik
Malik
Niang, vous
Nyang,
êtes en
are you
ligne, vous
there?
avez la
Over to
parole.
you, sir.
Bonjour tout le monde, j'espère que vous
Good
m'entendez
morning,
bien.
all.
Très bien.
Ok, ok.
Good
Bonjour tout le
morning,
monde.
all.
Alors ici, je suis Monsieur Malik
My
Niang,
name is Malik
donc
Nyang,
secrétaire à la
the secretary
communication au sein du
in the
bureau
Department
donc, de
of
WAFA,
Communication,
également
working with
manager
WAFA.
chez AgriTrade. Donc je remercie IFDC,
I first would like to
USAID, Fonds
commend
engrais,
IFDC,
ATEX
ATES,
et tous nos
USAID, and
collaborateurs
all
qui nous
our
aideront liés à ces
all
travaux.
our partners.
Je prends la parole aujourd'hui avec un thème qui a
Today,
une très
I am
forte et
speaking in this
imposante voix au
webinar,
niveau de WAFA.
which has
J'aimerais
a
par
very
cette
strong
occasion
topic. I would like to seize the
rappeler un peu ce que
opportunity
WAFA est,
to
peut-être à ceux
recall
qui n'ont peut-être
what
pas
WAFA is for all of
certaines
us. For
informations.
those who don't
WAFA
have the
est
information,
l'association
WAFA
donc,
is the West
ouest-africaine des
African
professionnels de l'engrais.
Fertilizer
Donc,
Association.
depuis 2016, qui œuvre donc à
Since
fédérer
2016,
les
we are
forces
working to
vives
join
donc, du secteur
the
privé,
strong forces in the
des
private
sociétés, des
sector,
entreprises,
the companies, and other
d'associations qui évoluent dans le
associations
secteur
in
des
the
engrais.
fertilizer
Donc,
industry.
nous
So
avons
we
en notre sein
have
la majeure partie de
most
toutes
of the
les
people
sociétés
from the
privées
private
ici en Afrique
sector
de
in
l'Ouest,
West Africa.
mais également
In addition
nos
to that, we
partenaires.
also have
Et
other
notre
stakeholders
objectif
from other parts of the world.
premier ou
Our
principal, ou en tout
objective,
cas l'un de nos objectifs les plus
the
importants,
main one,
c'est bien entendu
is to
d'œuvrer pour une
work
meilleure
towards
utilisation,
a
une
better
meilleure
use and
disponibilité, mais aussi
accessibility
à des prix
and affordability
beaucoup plus
of
intéressants que l'avenir
fertilizers
en Afrique de
in
l'Ouest.
West Africa.
Je ne vous apprends rien, et je pense, en vous disant que
When I
notre
say that
région est le
our
parent
region
pauvre de tout ce
is
qui est
the
utilisation ou
uh,
en tout cas, on va dire,
is
utilisation
lagging
des engrais
behind
ou des produits
in the
fertilisants,
usage of fertilizers
même
or
en Afrique, mais aussi
inputs
dans le monde.
on the
Donc,
continent and at the
il va
global
sans
level.
dire que un de
So
nos
we have to
challenges,
understand that
une de
one
nos
of our
grandes
main
difficultés
challenges
est bien entendu
is
l'accès au
access
financement.
to
L'accès au
funding.
financement
Access to
uniquement,
funding,
comme il s'agit
since this is what we
uniquement
are
dans le
talking about
secteur
today.
des engrais, dans
Access to
la
funding
partie,
pertaining to
bien
fertilizers.
entendu, financement de
How do we
l'acquisition des
fund
engrais. Donc, parce
fertilizer
qu'à l'intérieur du
purchase.
financement des engrais, vous avez
Because
toujours
when
des
you talk
choses, vous avez
about
les espaces
fertilizer
pâturés,
supply chain, you have a
vous avez
whole
l'accès
lot
même
of
aux
infrastructure.
engrais,
You
vous
have the
avez tout ce
infrastructure,
qui
you
est,
have
comment dirais-je, le
the
financement
funding
d'opérations
of
liées à la
various
fourniture des engrais. Vous avez une
transactions
panoplie, bien entendu,
in
de démembrement
supplying
en ce qui concerne le besoin en fertilisation.
fertilizers.
Aujourd'hui, il s'agit pour WAFA de trouver des
From
solutions,
WAFA,
de comprendre et
we want
d'essayer
to find
d'influer
solutions
sur la
and
disponibilité
also
de ces
have an
financements
influence
à
on
travers donc
these
le
funding
secteur privé. Le
solutions,
secteur privé
working
qui
together
a d'énormes
with the private
difficultés
sector,
d'accéder
because the
au
private sector
financement
had
des engrais.
challenges in
Donc, c'est un
accessing
domaine,
the funding.
on va dire, parfois
So I
nouveau
can
pour
say
certaines
that
institutions.
is
Nous avons
a
l'appui quand
new
même
concept
assez,
for some
assez rigoureux de
institutions,
nos partenaires
but
tels que la
with the
SAID.
support of
Nous
USAID,
avons
among
essayé dans le
others,
temps avec des organismes comme la
we
BAD,
have worked
nous avons
together
même eu en
with
cours avec
AFDB
Bank,
and even with Afresim Bank
de
to
comprendre et de trouver des
understand
solutions
and
pour,
to
on va dire, casser le
come
verrou
up
de
with
l'accès du
solution
financement
for
ou de
us
la disponibilité du
to
financement des engrais,
solve
l'accès aux
the
intrants. Comment
bottleneck
est-ce que les banques,
in
comment est-ce que les institutions
assessing
financières,
the
comment est-ce que nos
funding.
partenaires
How can
peuvent
banks, how
intégrer la
can
chaîne
our
de valeur
partners
pour que ces
help us
financements-là puissent être
and also
disponibles.
work in the
Donc, notre
value chain?
cher ami
So
Yul
my
a
colleague, Mr.
parlé
Yul,
un tout petit
talked
peu de
about
certaines
some challenges.
difficultés, donc liées bien entendu donc à la captivité ou je ne sais pas, à l'accès
He talked
donc de ces
about the
financements-là.
access
Il
to
y a
the
des
funding.
initiatives qui sont
There are
faites, il y a
initiatives
bien entendu
that are
un
already
ensemble d'éléments qui sont
implemented
en train d'être mis en
together
place
with
et bon,
some
c'est des
other
constats que
actions.
nous, en tout
But
cas
we can say that
l'association et même
our
le secteur privé,
association and the
l'accès au
private
financement reste
sector
l'un des éléments les
find
plus
it
difficiles, l'un
difficult
des
to
éléments les plus
access the
pollués
funding.
quand il s'agit d'implémenter, on va dire,
So when we talk
ou de
about
vulgariser
implementing
l'utilisation des
or
intrants agricoles en Afrique de
disseminating
l'Ouest. Donc,
agricultural
nous sommes
input
tous
in
heureux, nous
West
sommes
Africa,
tous
we want to bridge those
contents d'être
challenges. So it's my
parmi vous
pleasure to be
aujourd'hui.
here with you
Aujourd'hui,
today,
beaucoup plus, j'ai envie de dire,
where I
nous
am
nous ouvrons
tempted to
nous
say
ouvrons les
that
oreilles pour mieux comprendre
we are
qu'est-ce
all
que nos
cleared-eyed
partenaires peuvent,
to
bien
see
entendu,
exactly what our partners
nous
want.
guider ou quels sont
What
les
are
éléments
their
d'information que nous
orientations?
pouvons, à
What
partir
can we
donc, de
do?
cette réunion-là,
What will be our takeaway from this
faire
meeting
bénéficier à nos membres, faire
in
bénéficier au
order
secteur
to
des engrais.
bring some
Nous
value
sommes
addition to
ici,
our
nous
members?
félicitons et
So we are
nous
here
très contents
listening to
d'être
you,
parmi vous aujourd'hui. Et nous
and
restons également
also we
disponibles
are available
s'il y a des partenaires ou
whether
en tout cas des collègues qui n'ont
there
pas
is a
plus
partner
d'informations
or
concernant WAFA.
other
Nous
partners
serons
or colleagues
disponibles et nous
who
sommes
have
là
few
aussi pour répondre à
information
des
on
questions
WAFA. I'm here. I will
concernant
be
WAFA.
glad to
Je vous remercie.
answer any question. Thank you.
Merci infiniment, Monsieur
Thank you,
Malik Niang,
Mr.
pour
Malik
ces mots qui sont
Nyang,
si bien
for your
introducteurs.
beautiful
À présent,
words.
nous allons entrer encore de façon plus vive
Now
dans
we are
ce
going
rendez-vous et
into
passer
our
à la
business.
présentation de nos panélistes.
We are
Nous en
going to
avons
the introduction of
cinq.
our panelists.
Voilà,
We have
j'aimerais
five of them. So
reconnaître
right
ici
here I
la
have
présence de
Mr.
Monsieur
Ayo
Ayo
Balogun
Balogun de
from
Wallace Associates.
Wallace
Je voudrais
and Associates.
reconnaître
I
la
will also
présence de Monsieur
salute
Charles
the
Siekam.
presence
Il
of
est expert en
Mr.
banque et
Charles
commerce.
Siekam,
Reconnaissons
bank
également la
expert,
présence de Armand
Mr.
Yoka qui
Armand
représente
Yoka,
ATES.
representing
Et
ATES,
nous aurons
and we
aussi
also
Monsieur
have Mr.
Zumdi qui est
Zumdi,
agro-dealer. Nous
an
aurons
agro
aussi Monsieur
dealer,
Jean
Mr.
Hunandé qui est
Jean
DG à
Hunande
DPA.
from
Pardon, mais
DBA,
donc
from
nous
the
avons tous
blending
les secteurs qui
industry.
sont
So we
représentés.
have almost
Nous sommes
all
en
the
plein du
sectors
secteur privé, du
representing the
secteur
private, the
public et
public,
du
and the
secteur
civil
public.
society hereby
Merci
represented.
infiniment.
Thank you for
À
your
présent,
presence.
j'aimerais
Now, I would
introduire
like to
Monsieur
invite
Kido
Mr. Kido
Kwasi. Voilà, Monsieur
Kwasi,
Kido Kwasi, qui est le chef de
who is
projet,
the chief of project
chef
and
adjoint de
he
projet,
is
donc
the
en
vice
charge
chief
de
of project in
l'implémentation et
charge
de
of
la
the
mise en œuvre donc
implementation
de ce
of
projet-là.
such project.
Alors, Monsieur Kido Kwasi
Mr.
va
Kido
prendre la
Kwasi,
parole pour modérer
over to
la
you to
session qui va à
facilitate the
présent prendre
session.
place.
We are
Monsieur Kido
starting. Good
Kwasi,
morning,
bonjour.
Mr. Kido
Merci de prendre la
Kwasi.
parole.
Good morning, and over to you, sir.
Bonjour
Good
Claire,
morning, Claire.
merci. Merci à tous d'être
Thank
avec
you
nous pour
all.
cette réunion importante. Euh, Dr. Yul l'a
Dr.
précisé
Yul
très bien,
said
Malik
after
a aussi
him,
insisté, la
uh,
question du
we had
financement est
you
très importante
Malik,
Et
who
pour
also
nombre
reiterated
de
the
participants à
funding.
cette réunion l'attestent
We
bien,
can see
nous allons
that proven by the number
immédiatement
of participants we
commencer
have in
avec les
this meeting
présentations.
today.
Donc, nous
So
aurons
we
seulement des
have a series of
présentations,
presentations,
à commencer par la
starting with
présentation de Monsieur
Mr.
Ayo
Ayo
Balogun, qui
Balogun,
est un
who
expert
is
sur la
an
question des
expert
financements.
on
Avec le
funding.
projet Engrais, nous
We
avons fait une
also
étude
made
pour
a
mieux
study in the
comprendre
framework of
les
Angre
questions
project
liées au
to
financement.
understand the
Et cette
agro
étude a
funding
été
mechanism.
aussi des pistes de
And
solutions
from
pour
there,
voir ce qui
we
marche
came up
concrètement
with
dans certains pays de
what
la région.
is
Et cette étude a
best
été
fit
produite par
for the
nos
region.
associés, dont Monsieur Ayo
Mr.
fait
Ayo
partie.
is
Nous
also
allons dans
part
la régie
of that
nous allons
analysis.
passer la présentation de
So
Monsieur
let me
Ayo,
start
qui va
sharing
ouvrir son
Mr.
micro
Ayo's
et
presentation. Mr.
continuer sa
Ayo,
présentation.
over to you
Immédiatement
for your
après, nous
presentation. And
aurons
let
la
me recall you
présentation de
that
Monsieur
right after Mr. Ayo, we
Charles,
have
qui est un
Mr.
expert
Charles,
le,
who
dans les
is an
banques, dans le
expert
système de
in
banque
traditional or
traditionnel
conventional banking
au
system,
Burkina, qui va
conventional
aussi
banking
donner
system
le
in
point de
Burkina
vue des
Faso.
banques.
He will
Et
also give
enfin,
us
nous aurons
the standing
Monsieur
points
Armand
of the
Datex, qui est
banks.
aussi
We have
euh,
Mr. Armand
qui
Yoka,
apporte un mécanisme
who
nouveau
will be
qui est
sharing a
avancé,
new
donc qui
mechanism
va
with
le
us.
présenter, qui allie facilitation du
How do we
commerce et
facilitate
aussi avec
fertilizer
un aspect
trade
de financement.
in
Donc, à la
assessing
suite de ces trois
the
présentations, nous
fundings?
aurons des
So right
échanges
after their
avec
presentations,
les
we have
représentants de la
discussions
chaîne
with
de
the
valeur,
representative
dont
of the
Monsieur Zoundi,
value chain, such
depuis
as
si
Mr.
au Burkina
Zundi,
Faso, qui
based in
s'occupe
Burkina Faso.
les agro-dealers que l'a mentionné,
We have
et
the agro
Monsieur
dealers
Jean,
and
qui
Mr.
est
Jean,
DG
who
adjoint
is
à
the
DPA, qui
Deputy
va représenter le point de vue
General
des jeunes
Director.
et le point de vue, n'est-ce pas,
He will be sharing
des
the
importateurs.
standing point
Aussi,
of
à la suite de
the
ces discussions et
dealers or the
précieux
blenders with
échanges
us.
qu'on aura, on pourra prendre des
So
questions
after that,
directes du
we
public, des
go
présentateurs
to
et
question
des
and
panélistes.
answers.
Sur ce, je vais laisser la
This
parole
being
à
said,
Monsieur
let me give the floor to
Ayo
Mr.
Balogun.
Ayo Balogun.
Est-ce que sa présentation est prête?
Is your presentation ready, sir?
Thank you, Kido. While we wait for the presentation, maybe I can just give a bit of background to the presentation I'm about to make. So it's out of a study by Wallace and Associates, which is a small consulting company that focuses on finance and a little bit of technical, not a lot of technical, but finance and business and strategic issues in the fertilizer sector in Africa. So we conducted a study for Hungary in West Africa to try to understand what was going on with financing, but more importantly, to try to understand what the success stories were with respect to financing that could be leveraged and replicated in other countries in West Africa. And so that's a bit of the background for this particular presentation. Let me hit the presentation straight away. And it's important to give a bit of context to the sector because finance is a tool. It's a tool that acts or that one leverages to create value. And so it's important to understand the context of the activity when one is thinking about financing an activity. So I'm going to start with a bit of the context. And it's important to note that in sub-Saharan Africa, after many decades of interventions, the issues are still fundamentally the same. And it appears that we continue to sort of focus on affordability, availability, farmer knowledge defined broadly, or thought about narrowly, with a lot of emphasis on cost upstream. How do we reduce cost upstream? How do we build a manufacturing plant such that the cost of fertilizer will be cheaper when it's manufactured? Now, more recently, we've been thinking about how do we reduce the cost at the farmer level? So initially it will be cost upstream will translate into farmer level cost reduction. Now we're thinking reduction of cost at the farmer level directly. And a lot of the focus has been within country boundaries. I know Hungary has done a lot of work over the last 4 or 5 years about creating a regional focus, and I hope that continues. Now, what was ignored, if we start from the last, is regional synergy. So effectively, I mean, fertilizer, like other commodities, might actually work better if it's a regional, if there's a regional look to it rather than it's been within country boundaries. We've ignored also that a private supply chain can be actually quite useful. It can be very useful because it seeks growth. Private organizations and private systems actually almost always want to grow and they become very competitive. And when they become competitive, they educate the consumer because they understand that the growth is at the consumer level. And as they see potential, private systems invest in themselves. And effectively, as they continue with these activities, private systems become a lot more efficient in how they deliver value to the consumer. What we've also ignored are constraints that are evident in the fertilizer supply chain. So for example, infrastructural constraints. And I always give an example that in Nigeria, for example, the losses year after year due to flooding. I think last year there was some study done that as many as maybe 300,000 or more farmers might have been affected, maybe 100,000 farmers displaced. And these floods occur along rivers that are generally irrigation areas. So effectively, most productive farmers are subject to that. Now, those are significant constraints to productivity, and they could constitute a high risk to financing. We ignore also that at the farmer level, it's important for the farmer to make money. And that at the farmer level, the farmer has some cultural issues that might make him behave in a particular way towards technology. And we seem to ignore also that the private sector has significant investment capacity, in fact, significantly more than most governments in the region. So the summary is that, well, there's been a lot of prominence given to government funding and raw material costs at the detriment of the private sector, at the detriment of conversion costs, of farmer productivity, and country synergies. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about how finance can help. So in light of all of these issues, like I said, finance creates value, looks for value, and supports value creation. So finance is about productivity. And of course, in agriculture and in fertilizer, we're interested in agricultural productivity. So with finance, one can think about finance coming in to improve productivity in all sorts of ways. And it can be structured to be an incentive or to disincentivize bad behavior. So finance will improve product quality. It helps to improve efficiency. It demands efficiency of recipients of financing. It can help to improve capacity, and it can be structured to support innovation. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd start by actually giving a highlight of the Hungary study before I move into the main topic, because, well, it still provides context for the main topic. So effectively, I mean, what we found in West Africa, and we found a lot of that also in Africa, because after the Hungary study, we went into the rest of Africa, apart from North Africa, and did some deep dives. We found out a lot of the governments put a lot of emphasis on the protection of income and forex, and to the detriment of growth of GDP. I won't explain a lot to that, but it affects policies, it affects behavior of governments. And that effective demand, which we define as demand when farmers have money for the product, for fertilizer, want to buy it. I mean, so you have a population that has money and wants. and the population wants to buy the product, that's effectively the effective demand. And that a lot of the effective demand has not been satisfied in most countries. If we want to double consumption or triple, as is being put on the table for the objective at the African summit, then we will have to exploit latent demand. And latent demand is actually a number of farmers or a population of farmers that does not have either money, does not understand the product, and effectively is not willing yet to buy, but we know has the potential to benefit from the products. So that's latent demand. So we will eventually have to exploit a lot of latent demand if we want to get there. And we find that the government influence is still extremely strong, despite significant investments by the private sector over the last sort of decade. So governments effectively still dominate and still compete for domination of a sector. And then we find also that a lot of the crops that are supposed to be fertilized and that we spend a lot of effort fertilizing are still inadequately fertilized. I mean, they're not fertilized well in quantity, so they still don't receive the right quality of products, and they still don't receive the right quantity of products. So effectively, the progress that we've made is, I mean, what I'd call, it'd be difficult to call it a success. And so that's generally the context, the high level context for West Africa. And from a summary of what we found with respect to fertilizer systems, we found two types of systems. I mean, we categorize the systems into two types. One system dominance, one fringe. The dominant systems are the systems that, as we describe them, are the most prominent in a country. So it could be a government program, for example, in Senegal, and any other thing outside struggles or has to remain literally constrained into a corner because, well, the dominant system is functioning and everybody supports the dominant system. And then we have the fringe systems where there are a few innovative things happening. Generally, we find that the fringe systems focus exclusively on the farmer. But the dominant systems might have all sorts of other motivations. And we have 4 solution models. And when I say solution models, I'm talking about financing and what financing could achieve. The first one is funding to take products into countries. So first is to try to make products available in country. So move it from the international markets into country because most countries are not producers. One model. Second model is to try to improve government subsidy programs. We know those subsidy programs are not going to go away quickly. We know there's some utility for subsidy programs depending on how they're directed and depending on how they're structured. So effectively, that knowledge can we bring to bear on current government subsidy programs. That's number 2. Number 3 is we found risk-sharing models of interested parties. And when we say interested parties, it's parties that are interested in farmer productivity, are willing to share the risk of financing the farmer. So we found a couple of risk-sharing models that we thought were interesting and that we thought we could build on in the region. And we suggest having growth capital for innovative companies that tend to reach the farmer. So effectively, we're looking at opportunities to fund programs that touch the farmer directly. And for these financing solution models, we created 8 variants, but I mean, we could have a lot more variants, but it's just to sort of trigger thoughts about how to think about financing is why we're giving examples. So I could even say there are more examples than variants of the solutions. Next slide, please. So the next slide, I'm not going to go into it at all. I think it's a slide that I think most of us are familiar with. It's a slide that talks about the issues associated with financing. as you go down the fertilizer supply chain, and when I say the issues associated with financing, I'm talking about the difficulty of financing as you go down the supply chain. And this difficulty is created by three major elements. The first one being size of the consignments. At an import level, of course, a consignment could be as big as, I don't know, maybe even 50,000 metric ton. It's not complicated. It comes to an individual, it takes a long time to arrive. So there's a size of a consignment, there's the time for the turnaround, the cycle time, and then there are the characteristics of the recipient of the financing. So if it's an importer, he's got a particular balance sheet. He's bringing 50,000 tons. It's very easy to deal with from a financing perspective. As you go down the chain, it becomes a lot more complicated. By the time you are getting to the retailer, the financing size could be 5 bags. The turnaround time could be 2 hours. So it becomes a lot more difficult to finance, and the attributes are different. I mean, at the retailer level, the balance sheet is different, transparency of the business is different, the risks associated are definitely completely different. So this chart explains that it's going to be circulated. So there's no reason, and I don't have time also, but I think it's essential because it provides background knowledge to understanding financing of the supply chain. Next, please. So if we look into a solution framework, and we have 4 sorts of categories of solutions. We say one is governments. I mean, government is dominant in a lot of markets, so it's difficult to ignore government. So what can we do with governments? I mean, we can tweak current government activity to make government activity more efficient. So effectively, is government bringing in, like at one time in Nigeria, only 2010? I mean, it doesn't sound appropriate. So could we organize for government to bring in better products? It won't cost significantly more. The farmer will benefit better. That's one. 2, from a government perspective, are there issues if we consider Cote d'Ivoire, where there is probably what we hear from technical people of increasing acidity linked to cocoa farming? Could the funds of government be used to solve a problem of that nature, or could it be leveraged to solve a problem of that nature? That's still a part of the efficiency of government funds, use of government funds. And effectively, from a subsidy perspective or from a government funds perspective, could government funds be used to target different crops other than traditional crops? And we find every time we do an analysis that most of the fertilizers go to commercial crops. So it's either very commercial crops like cotton and cocoa, or semi-commercial crops like maize. And I call it semi-commercial because a big part of the maize is being used by feed mills like maize. And sometimes sorghum, for example, has become semi-commercial, but staples are completely ignored. And staples are essential for food security. So can government funding be directed to non-commercial crops, to staples? Large institutions are extremely important to financing within a country, and large institutions can act in 2 ways. They can help to bring products into the country. A lot of institutions do that. So they have warehouses either by the ports or in big countries around the port area, but they could also move those products closer to the market. So rather than storing near the ports, they could move closer to where the markets are. And they have the financial muscle to do that. Of course, they need to be sure of the markets before they can do that. We advocate for funding of fringe players. I mean, so the fringe players I explained a bit earlier, and they need 3 types of funding. They need working capital, they need capital assets funding, and they need market development funding. So because they're growing in markets that's significantly bigger than them, so they can't do it alone. They can't go it alone. So they will assist the growth of the fertilizer sector. And of course, stakeholder involvement. So effectively, stakeholder involvement that we're talking about here is actually stakeholders interested in farmer productivity, combining to create risk-sharing tools or risk-sharing funds or risk-sharing money that they can use to enable growth of the markets. Next slide, please. So this slide, I'm going to move on. I mean, it explains a bit more of the models. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. It's not significantly different to the one I've spoken about. So I'll move to the slides where I explain a little bit the solution variants at a high level, because I know there'll be questions later, and then we can go into details with respect to the questions. So one example is government efficiency. So government efficiency, for example, in trying to be very practical about it, supposing a government spends $100 million today, but maybe it's Senegal, and half of it is going into, for example, groundnuts, and nothing is going into a crop that's a staple. So maybe 10%, maybe 15% of the government money, without changing the budgets, can be directed into a staple with a process that has been defined. And I believe IFDC has the targeted inputs subsidy program properly defined. I mean, the framework for it properly defined. Maybe that can be done with all of the soil health considerations brought to bear on the system that's developed without affecting the government budget, only splitting it and not changing significantly what I'd call the predominant government structure. So just starting to develop a new way of looking at it within the market and starting to create value with a particular percentage of government funding. So that's one. Next slide, please. This one is talking about importers. So for example, it could be in Senegal, but this could happen also in Ghana. So in Senegal, for example, the large multinationals that actually put stock in the country, but they don't put enough stock. There are all sorts of reasons why their stocks won't be sufficient, and it's always useful to have competition anyway. So the local importers that don't have capacity need money. The banks struggle to fund. I mean, something to do with the balance sheet of banks, something to do with the willingness of the banks to fund. Like the Bank for Agriculture in Senegal, for example, could get a government guarantee. And we're not talking about the normal government guarantee, but maybe a sovereign guarantee. I mean, if fertilizer is important, if agriculture is important, having a sovereign guarantee for it shouldn't be too much of a stress, such that the bank can provide the LC for the importer after conducting the normal diligence, and the importer can import normally and work normally according to the capacity of the importer. So that's a second possible variant. Next slide, please. If we go to a risk-sharing model, we like to talk about the case of Advance in Cote d'Ivoire, where they worked on the cocoa value chain, I believe, and they're thinking of going to other value chains. And in this model, it's a group of Advance is a microfinance bank. They bring together a group of stakeholders, including the farmer cooperative, who's interested in providing service to the farmer. So the farmer cooperative, and they ask for sums of money or percentages from all of these stakeholders into a pool that becomes a risk, a guarantee pool, guarantee for the risk of failure of the system. So the input supplier contributes into it, the cooperative contributes into it. You can call it the equity of the cooperative. Advance takes a large chunk of it. They could take as much as 60% of it. And if there's a processor, an anchor that's interested, the anchor contributes into it. And once that's done, Advance is able to advance credits to effectively the farmer. Advance is able to fund the input supplier such that the input supplier is able to give products to the farmer. So effectively, the farmer gets credits, trade credits, products on credits, and the farmer can work, and then the money comes back through the anchor. So we found that it worked very well. Advance, the last time we spoke to them, were expanding gradually. They started with a little fund from the World Bank. It wasn't a lot of money, but that kind of fund also could be expanded in terms of its objective to introduce some very interesting soil health conditions, such that as the project starts, the project takes into consideration the health of the soil and the sustainability of the farmer's profitability. Next, please. So this is the case of an anchor for the farmer. I mean, an anchor is an organization that actually that deals with the farmers. And it could be that the anchor is a processor. It could be that the anchor is an aggregator, but of standing. So the aggregator deals with farmers, and effectively dealing with farmers means that aggregator or the anchor already has a financial relationship with the farmers where credit is involved. So this is about growing that relationship, and growing the business of the anchor is usually difficult because, well, of course, to grow it, the anchor needs a lot of working capital. If the anchor were to want to grow it alone, and the anchor doesn't have the balance sheet to get that kind of credit from banks. So effectively, a pool could be created also. A guarantee pool could be created. I mean, it could be an institution like the FFM. It could be other institutions that get together and create a guarantee pool between the blender and the anchor, which will have, like we continue to say, conditions regarding the soil. The anchor might require an implementing partner to help because it's growth, and the anchor is not able to fund also the technical part. The anchor sometimes doesn't have the technical expertise, and the anchor is also not able to fund the technical requirements. So there, donors could help and work with the anchor. So the anchor is now able to provide a lot more credit to a lot more farmers, and the system is able to provide significantly more technical assistance to the farmer. Next, please. So this is just a variation of the other one of the anchor, but still back to the Côte d'Ivoire situation where it's a much larger anchor and there's need for something like liming. So this system could potentially bring in a lime producer. I mean, is a lime producer in Côte d'Ivoire, is a lime producer in Mali, is a lime producer in Ghana, it matters not. There's a lime producer that can add value. The system could be created such that the large anchor is linked to DFIs or commercial banks banked by DFIs. The lime producer can be supplied credits or working capital. The lime producer produces for cooperatives. The anchor, because the anchor here buys the products, could be taxed a little. You'd call it the soil health tax or the sustainability tax, because that guarantees the business of the anchor also. So the anchor could be taxed a little, which gets put into the fund for the system, to make the system work and to continue. So this is a variant of the anchor with additional value that requires a significantly larger population of farmers. Next. The aggregator is like the initial anchor we talked about, only that the aggregator in this case needs to be linked to a processor or is already linked to a processor. And so the aggregator in this case is more acting like a trader, but realizes the importance of farmer productivity for his growth and is willing to grow. So it's to assist the aggregator to provide more credits to more farmers, but at the same time providing technical assistance. And we advocate for the type of funding that's available to always be funding with a soil health component. And so maybe, I mean, one opportunity will be to create a soil health fund, and it's all for all of the systems we're talking about, such that this soil health fund provides money to guarantee pools and to all of these things, with particular emphasis on soil health management. Next. Microfinance banks, a variant of the advance program, but in this case, different to the advance program, microfinance banks already have relationships with farmers. The farmers might not be in cooperatives. The advance model depends on farmers being in cooperatives. It's a precondition. In this case, microfinance banks have relationships, so it's leveraging those relationships and growing the relationships. And because, of course, microfinance banks lack technical fertilizer knowledge, they're going to require technical assistance. There's need for a guarantee pool. In the guarantee pool, the microfinance bank puts money. You can put in some soil health fund to help the microfinance bank develop. Microfinance banks on their balance sheets are always looking for money. Cheaper money than what they have, because they take a lot of money from commercial banks. So a soil health fund investing reduces the costs, the financial cost of the microfinance bank, creates the usual guarantee pool, enables the microfinance bank to lend to farmers or to provide products to farmers. So it's just a change of products for the microfinance banks. They provide products to farmers anyway, and link and anchor to it to offtake and to also participate in the risk sharing too. Next, please. Then there is a variant like in the Nigerian PFI system where the NAIC MPK, that's the principal importer of fertilizers into the market, needs to be either paid cash or needs to have a guarantee from a Class A financial institution before it can sell to a blender. Now, effectively, at the moment, I understand there are more than 70 blenders in the country, but you can imagine that slightly less than 20% of the blenders are actually able to fund themselves to capacity. And the rest of the blenders don't have the balance sheets to do that. But some of them are serious and are interested in farmer productivity and are interested in market development. So those ones could get a guarantee from a fund, an institution like the AFFM, or other institutions that are interested in providing guarantees to NAIC MPK, the importer, such that the blender gets credits from NAIC MPK, and the blender is able to make products a lot more available to farmers. Next, please. So which institutions are able to deliver, these models? A lot of them are traditional, but there's some that are non-traditional and there's some that are non-financial. So the traditional institutions are there. Governments, the development banks, they're able to provide support in one way or the other. The non-traditional to finance institutions, but that can come in and actually trigger significant growth. Institutions like the FFM, private equity institutions could help. Institutions, microfinance institutions, aggregators like IFEX, like Thrive Agri could help significantly. Or maybe even a completely new funding structure could be created if it doesn't exist to help drive this growth, especially of the fringe players that are working on farmer productivity. But then you need also non-financial institutions who are implementers, because a lot of these institutions, apart from the commercial banks and the microfinance institutions, don't have feet on the ground. So you need non-financial institutions that could implement, like IFAP, and I'm sure that probably other financial institutions. But what we saw in West Africa predominantly was outside the microfinance and the commercial institutions. We saw that it was only IFAP that was active as an implementer in the market. So that effectively is my presentation. I mean, so effectively it's how to frame the problem, and how to frame the solutions and the elements that constitute models that could work and that have worked actually in West Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Ayou.
You, very
Très
interesting presentation, very
importante.
important also. Very rapidly, we've just seen an opinion,
Plutôt
an external opinion from
analytique de la
an
situation.
analytical viewpoint of the situation. And now we're going to look at the same problem from the standpoint
du secteur des banques.
of the banking sector. So we have Mr. Sechal, who is going to make a presentation and make a presentation of the same problem and potential solutions and what would be important to improve the solution from the standpoint of commercial banks. So I will ask the technical department to display the presentation of Mr. Sechal. And in the presentation of Mr. Ayew, he spoke about advanced. We plan to have a person from advanced, but for some reasons, he could not be here. But however, in the Q&A question, we'll be allowed to ask more questions on the presentation made by Mr. Ayew and the others. And while the technical department is getting ready, Mr. Charles, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Kido.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kido.
Merci,
thank you, the organizers.
Merci à l'ensemble
Thank
des
you, dear
participants
participants, for being here to listen to us on this problematic, which is quite interesting. And we need a synergy of action from the stakeholders in order to overcome this challenge
de financement et d'accompagnement des acteurs
to the actors
dans les
in
intrants et notamment dans l'engrais.
the input sector and
Alors,
the fertilizers. Mr. C, you can activate your video.
Alors,
well,
okay. On me dit que je ne peux
they are
pas
telling
mettre
me
la
that I
vidéo.
can play my
Mais
video,
je vais
but no
poursuivre.
problem. I will.
D'accord, allez-y.
D'accord, ok. Ok, je pense que c'est
I
bon.
think it's good.
Alors, moi, je suis
I'm a financial expert for 10 years now. I've been working in support financing, sensitization, capacity building, financial education of the rural agricultural sector. And also over the past few years, my institution, which is the Chorus Bank, I have the responsibility of providing climate finance for everything relating to the financing of activities relating to the preservation of the environment, the greenhouse gas reduction. My presentation will revolve around 3 points, notably the first will be challenges and constraints related to the financing of input stakeholders in the West Africa. And the second will be on the identification of existing financial mechanisms. And finally, proposals of solutions and appropriate mechanisms for the financing of inputs in our sub-region. Well, for the next slide, when it comes to the financial constraints and challenges connected to fertilizers, you have to know that generally there is a lack of financial tools specific to the fertilizers. The financial institutions have this habit. Usually they provide financing with standard conditions that they apply to the fertilizer sector. So as a result, the interest rates are very high. The conditions, guarantee conditions, do not actually capture the realities of the stakeholders of the agricultural sector and of the players in the input sector. We also have the financial regulation in the sub-region, which is much more rigid, that does not capture the realities of our stakeholders in the framework of their economic activities. In addition to that, there is the synergy of action partnerships in the fertilizer sector, which is very limited. In other sectors, like in agricultural production, processing, distribution of agro-food products, there are partnerships that exist and that are quite interesting for the various players and that facilitates financing for the players. But in the fertilizer sector, in the input sector, this partnership, this synergy of action is quite limited. Therefore, it's a major challenge that we need to actually take into consideration. I'm not saying that there is no partnership or synergy of actions. They do exist, but they need to be reinforced for the good, for the benefit of people working in the production. The second point is that in the sector, the financing of the value chain discards the fertilizer sector. This is a sector that supports production. I think it's the grassroots. It is the initial element that triggers production, processing, and distribution, and even consumption of agro-food products. But when we make a structure of players or the value chain or of the various sectors, there is a tendency to ignore the sector of inputs. And this is a major challenge that we have in the modeling of the financing model mechanism. The other point is the very limited financial capacity of the stakeholders to mobilize funding. So when it comes to the stakeholders in the fertilizer sector, there is a low capacity of investment on their side, notably those who want to build blending units or warehouses. They have very limited financial capacities, and it is very difficult for them to mobilize resources for the operation to acquire raw material and also for massive imports of products to be made available to the agricultural world, while in the agricultural year, there is always a lack of input for the stakeholders. We also have this challenge for financial institutions to have financial documents that can comply with some financial indicators in order to make agricultural financing available.
We also have this challenge to work among themselves as stakeholders, producers, blenders, processors, and even distributors. Now, on the market, we have the soaring of the prices, and this pertains to every single actor on the market. And we are highly dependent, if not 100% dependent, of the market and even of the raw material for those who are in the blending. So our country's systems is informal. The informal market is highly developed in our country, and in our countries, and we have to take account of that. We also have a low capacity in terms of negotiation, mainly for those who are in the import for both fertilizers and raw material. They don't have the real ability or capacity to negotiate with the main traders. Now, speaking of the producers, the challenges are, in view of all I said earlier, there is the need of funding on one side. On the other side, at the beginning of each season, our producers need money because they don't have the necessary financial capacity to buy the fertilizers and to start their cropping season as is supposed to be. So they also need to have access to credit. And once again, unfortunately, they have very low capacity of complying with the microfinance institutions because of their low capacity in mobilizing financial resources. So that is the reason why on one side we have challenges which will not really allow us to solve or to support the various stakeholders. We also have another point, which is the dependency of our producers to some product or some fertilizers. They are used to using some or buying some types of fertilizers. So they are very reluctant to new products. Let's say that a farmer really use a green bag of fertilizers, with a green formula, with a white formula. So when at the beginning of the season you come up with a new color or a new color, not of the bag or of the formula, they are reluctant. While the industry of fertilizers is evolving, every single day we have new formula or we have some development taking into account the soil health and the soil nutrition requirements. The producers are also reluctant in going to the financial institutions because they think that banks or microfinance institutes are not made for them, are not there for them. So they are always reluctant in going for funding. Now let's go to the political side. We notice that we have the issue of organized infrastructure, quality one. We need to develop that, either the availability of high capacity storage warehouse. And we know that our farmers don't have the ability to build such infrastructure, and even the roads and coming up with logistic. That is a whole set of issues we have to take into account. We also have lack of synergy between the private sector and the public in terms of availability of input and valorization of the fertilizers to the well-being or to the benefit of the farmer. Decision makers are working to solve the problem in order to provide good infrastructure, and the private sector also need to work in order to provide good business environment. So I think this is a two-party solution they have to come up with. The other point is the various intervention mechanism from one value chain to another. When you consider, for instance, the cash crop industry, the cotton in my country, the intervention policy is completely different from the intervention policy vis-à-vis the
consommation,
consumption
notamment le maïs, le sorgho et
products
autres.
such as corn and sorghum.
Les produits de
The
grande
cash
consommation sont
crops
beaucoup plus bien
are
structurés avec
far
des
better
associations de plusieurs
organized
pays. Par
than
rapport encore, les autres secteurs, les autres filières sont délaissées
the consumption
à eux-mêmes.
commodities.
Il y a aussi
And most often,
l'utilisation
they are
à des fins
left
politiques de
to
certains
themselves.
de
They are
projets,
left
de
behind
programmes, de
in terms of
partenariats
project,
qui fait que
partnership,
la destination souvent des actions de développement
and most
des
often than
producteurs
not,
n'arrive pas aux
the
bénéficiaires
development
adéquats.
funds
Et ça, c'est
or the
également c'est un pilier qu'il
subsidies
va falloir
really don't
remédier.
get
Il y a
to the
aussi
food
l'absence,
commodity.
ça c'est un point très important,
We also have
l'absence
the
des lois
absence of
ou de la
legislation
réglementation
or
liée à un
regulation
certain nombre de
in
mécanismes
terms of
financiers que
financial
les acteurs
mechanism.
financiers, les institutions financières ou les partenaires
Our
de
development
développement et
partners
les
or
acteurs à la base mettent en place pour pouvoir
financial
remédier
institutions fail
ces
to
déficits de
develop
financement.
such
Mais
financial mechanism to
quand
help
derrière,
these
il n'y a pas de
people.
réglementation
And
qui
since
puisse
there is
permettre aux
no
institutions financières
regulation to regulate or to
de
structure
prendre en
the
compte ces institutions
financial
comme étant des garanties, comme
mechanism,
étant des
therefore,
institutions
our
éligibles
financial
à des financements.
institutions fail to
Voilà.
consider the collateral as
Diapo
such.
suivant. Alors, pour ce qui concerne donc
Now, speaking
l'identification
of
des
the
mécanismes financiers existants,
identification of the
alors
existing financial
pour le premier
mechanism,
point
for the very
concerne
first
donc
point, it
le
has to do with the
partenariat.
partnership.
Alors, nous avons eu la
So
chance de
we were very
développer
lucky
beaucoup de
to develop
mécanismes de
many
financement des intrants avec
input
l'ensemble des partenaires du
funding
développement,
mechanism,
l'ensemble des acteurs à la base, que ce
whether
soit
with
les
the
producteurs,
grassroots
les
producers,
transformateurs
the
et également les
farmers,
opérateurs de grande distribution,
and
etc.
other
Pour le
stakeholders.
mécanisme de
So
partenariat,
the
ce
partnership
que nous avons pu
mechanism.
développer avec IFD.
Allô, Charles, nous avons perdu un peu ta voix. Si tu peux te
Mr.
rapprocher du
Charles,
micro.
kindly come close to the
OK.
microphone, please.
Alors,
We can barely
donc,
hear you.
donc, pour le mécanisme
Now,
de
speaking of the
partenariat dont
partnership
je
I was
parle,
talking about,
que nous avons pu développer avec
the one we developed
IFDC,
with IFDC,
alors ça consistait en son temps,
what was the
comme
content?
IFDC faisait
Since
l'accompagnement à
IFDC
l'emploi
was working
distributeurs ou des
with
organisations qui font
distributors
la
or
distribution d'intrants
other
agricoles et de
entities in the
semences agricoles,
agricultural
également
area,
l'accompagnement des
they also
coopératives et des
support the
producteurs à la base.
agricultural
Il y
cooperatives.
avait ce
So we
mécanisme
had a
qui
mechanism
consistait à
which
faire une mise en
consisted in
relation
linking
entre les
the
coopératives
farmers'
et les producteurs
organizations,
agricoles
the farmers,
et les institutions
and
de
the
financement
financial
non conventionnelles
institutions,
et également ceux qui
and
sont en
also
distribution
those who
d'intrants.
are
En
in
son temps,
input
c'était Cosima et
distribution.
Agrodiapo.
Then we
Alors,
have
cette mise en
INSMA and
relation
AgroProduce.
permettait à la banque
You know,
d'avoir
this
une certaine
relation
confiance vis-à-vis du
helped the
mécanisme qui était
bank
mis
to
en place
build their
avec une
trust in the
convention
farmers,
qui
in the
encadrait quelque part
organizations.
l'ensemble des
And this
activités
led to the
de
various
chaque partenaire.
initiatives
Alors,
we
donc,
saw
à cet
on
effet,
both sides.
les producteurs,
To this
cela
end,
permettait aux institutions financières
the
de
financial
mettre des financements au
institutions
profit des producteurs
made
à l'entrée de la saison,
financing available
avec notamment
at the coming of the season
un apport personnel de ces producteurs-là, avec des
with
cotisations
some
de ces
contributions at the
coopératives.
level of the farmers
Souvent, les
organization.
dépôts allaient de
So
montant
this
de 10%
contribution
à
was made of
15%
10 to
du montant de
15% of
financement.
the
Ça
funding
rassurait la
amount.
banque,
So
plus
this was a
l'accompagnement
guarantee
initial.
for the
Ça
bank.
nous
With
permettait
the support of
de mettre en
IFDC,
place des crédits
we had
au profit de ces
granted
coopératives
credit
et
to
de ces
these
producteurs
farmers'
agricoles. Et
organizations or to the
l'argent entrait
farmers,
directement sur les
and
comptes
the money was
des
directly
distributeurs
sent
d'intrants
to the account
afin
of the
que, à
input
l'entrée de la saison,
distributors, the agro
ils
dealers.
puissent en tout cas avoir
Then,
les
at the
intrants
beginning
nécessaires
of
et
the
respecter
season,
les calendriers
the
culturels.
farmers have
À la
access
fin de
to
la
the
campagne,
input.
quand les producteurs faisaient
At the
les
end
ventes,
of the
les recettes étaient
season,
virées
when the
directement
farmers sell their crops or
sur
their
leur compte
harvest,
en banque, ce qui
the
permettait
amount was
simplement de
directly
rembourser
sent
les
to the
crédits
account,
et
and a part of
toutes les
it
parties
was used
principales
to pay
s'en
back the
sortaient en tout
credit.
cas
So all the
satisfaites.
parties
Voilà. Le
are
second
satisfied
mécanisme
at
que
the
nous
end of
avons
the day.
également pu implémenter qui ressemble
The
au
third
premier,
one
c'est la
is
chaîne de
the
valeur
value chain and contractualization. The mechanism we have involves the processor. We are talking about the major processor of corn, cassava, or any other product with higher financial capacity. And they have good relation with financial institutions. So we have development institutions that were involved to facilitate this relation. On one hand, we were able to support the grassroots farmers to build their capacity, to raise their awareness, and even to train them on the production techniques on the various crops they have on their farm. Apart from that, we have the relation between the processor and the farmers' organization for them to negotiate forward contracts. So discussions were held, and all of them disclose their conditions, their modalities, and then at the end of the season, they can sell their crop and pay back their credit. We also work with the fertilizer providers. Once the prices is set, we therefore call in the financial institution. They come also with their own condition, how they are ready to support them, under which conditions, and then the money is sent to the account of the producers, and also on the account of the agro dealers. Then at the end of the day, the farmers have whatever they need to succeed in that period. So the produce of the harvest is now sent to the main processors. Once the sale is made, they usually send the money they owe the agro dealers and financial institutions. So this is the kind of mechanism that we always have with an interface. So we need a credible, a reliable interface in this value chain. If not, it's always difficult for the stakeholders to succeed in their negotiations. There is also another mechanism that we have implemented with the distributors, is the detention. This is a mechanism that helps us facilitate the funding. We have the collateral management. So the collateral management helps us transform or process in a very great quantity. So they are able to raise funds from the bank, and they can also import the fertilizers that are stocked in the warehouses. And we have a collateral manager. The responsibility of the collateral manager is to keep an eye on the stock that is in the warehouse. And we also work together with an insurance company. Their role is to make sure that the warehouse are compliant with the various requirements, and there will be no leakage, no humidity, neither fire, nor any challenge that will imperil the quantity of stock that we have in that warehouse. So in case of any risk, the insurance company will make sure that they pay back the amount of the stock. Because per se, this is a stock belonging to the bank or the financial institution. So anytime there is a contract.
Que ces porteurs d'engrais ont, il faut
We need
l'autorisation de la banque,
permission from the bank.
l'aval du tiers détenteur. Le tiers détenteur,
And
ce n'est
also
pas
we
la
need
banque
to
quand il
communicate
transforme
with the collateral manager.
périodiquement et la banque donne son accord
It's
de
only then
transfèrement
that the
quand il y a un
banks
marché
give
entre
the
ces deux
agreement
contrats.
to
Et ça
remove the
permet de
product
suivre
and
les
maybe
envolements des
take it
stocks.
to
Ça permet de suivre
the
la mise
sell
en
point.
œuvre du mécanisme
And
de
from that,
production
we
agricole.
also dissuade
C'est un outil.
any
Oui,
Désolé, on me fait signe que le temps
deviation.
est presque écoulé.
I'm
Si
so
on
sorry,
peut
sir. Your
donner encore
time
un-
is has
d'accord, il n'y a pas de
almost
souci. Je vais
elapsed.
aller
Can
assez
you
rapidement.
close this in
Il y
3
a
minutes?
aussi le
We
service
also
de
have
warrantage
the
et logistique
warrantage,
que
the
nous avons
extended
pu
warrantage,
implémenter qui
which
permet,
we
entre autres,
have been able to
de financer les associations
implement
de producteurs
just to
agricoles à
support
base,
the
sur la
grassroots
base des
population
produits agricoles
based
qui sont
on
prêts,
the
qui ont été bâtis.
agricultural
Et cela permet en tout
products.
cas aux
With
producteurs à la
this, the
base,
grassroots
aux organisations
farmer
de lever des
can
fonds sur le
raise
plan
funds
agricole auprès des
from
institutions
financial
financières pour
institutions
pouvoir faire acheter
and
les
be
intrants
able to
agricoles
buy
auprès des distributeurs dans de
agricultural
bonnes conditions.
input in the right
L'autre
condition.
mécanisme, c'est le fonds
Another
central
mechanism
qu'on
is the
avait
input
démonté.
fund or the
Alors, il
input
s'agit
trust.
donc de mettre en place des
So
fonds
right here we need
de
a
grande
guarantee
capacité au
fund. We
profit
need a guarantee fund
des distributeurs d'engrais ou en tout cas
to the benefit
donc
of
qui
the
permet donc
farmers
d'importer des
with
engrais
which they
pour
can
effectivement mettre à
import
disposition des intrants agricoles. Alors pour cela,
fertilizers.
généralement, il faut
In view of
faire des
this, you
expressions de
need to
besoins
have a
soit
need assessment
3 à 4 mois
3
avant
to
l'entrée
4
en
months
exécution du
before the
mécanisme de production
agricultural
agricole
season
qui puisse permettre aux institutions
and
financières
allow the
de
financial
mener toutes les
institutions
diligences liées en tout cas au
to
financement pour pouvoir
supply every
assurer les
necessary
besoins de fonds.
demand in
Il y a
terms of
aussi d'autres
financial
outils de financement
aspect.
que nous
We
avons
also
pu
have
mettre en place
another
dans
tool that we've
l'international
made
pour permettre de réaliser des
known
financements,
for
notamment
fundraising.
les ventes
We
et les
have
achats à
the
terme
forward
et le
sale,
crédit
and we
documentaire
also
financier
have
développé
the credit
au profit
that
des
we make
distributeurs de grandes
available
coopératives
for
et autres.
the
Voilà, comme solution et
farmers
mécanisme
organization. In terms of
politiquement,
solutions
en tout cas,
and mechanism,
implémenté au niveau politique,
politically
il s'agit
speaking, we first
d'édifier des
need to
politiques dédiées
develop
donc aux
policies
intrants avec une
for
structuration
input
des acteurs.
with a better
Il s'agit
organization of the
aussi
various
que
stakeholders.
nos politiques
We also
travaillent à
need our
légiférer les
decision
mécanismes
makers
de
to
financement sur les
legislate
tiers
on the
détenteurs,
various
notamment
funding
les
mechanisms,
DEFRO.
taking into
La
account
réglementation
the
puisse les
various
prendre en compte
financial
comme,
regulation. So
mesure
therefore, the
d'atténuation
financial
des
institution
risques et
will
des actions
consider the
financières.
farmers
Il va
and
falloir
also
que nos
have their own
politiques
guarantee.
travaillent à
We also
négocier
need
des
our
partenariats dans
policies
mesure
to
de bonne
focus
source,
on
à
the
moins qu'on
partnership for
ne
fund
facilite
mobilization or financial resource mobilization,
également
and this
et
efficiently
faciliter
and facilitate
l'accès au
their
marché
access to
international
international
pour la plupart
market.
des acteurs. Il s'agit aussi de
It's
favoriser
also
la
important
synergisation
to
entre les
promote
acteurs du privé
action synergy or
et également
collaboration among
avec les
between the
organisations de
private
développement
sector and the
pour
public
ensemble
sector
relever les
and
défis
the
de
development
financement des
institutions.
acteurs du monde des intrants. Pour ce qui concerne les
Now,
partenariats,
to
il
the
va falloir
partners,
les partenaires de développement, les
they need the
organisations
development partners,
de projets et
organizations,
programmes doivent
project and
tenir des
program. They
plaidoyers
need to
pour
have
la structuration des
advocacy
acteurs et la prise en
for the
compte des
better
risques
organization of the
financiers
various
dans la
stakeholders
réglementation
in
financière et
considering
mettre en
the
place
financial
également
mechanism,
des fonds
and also
FRS
made
qui permettent de
available some
faciliter
input fund or
l'importation
input
et la mise
trust
à
to
disposition
facilitate the
des intrants
production
au
and the
profit
import of
du monde agricole.
fertilizers.
Il y a aussi le
We can
renforcement
also talk
des
about the
capacités
capacity
des
building
acteurs
of
à
the
la
various
base, la
stakeholders, the
formation, la
grassroots level,
sensibilisation des producteurs surtout,
mainly for
et
the
également des acteurs
producers
des intrants et dans les chaînes de
in the
valeur, dans
various
la
value chain,
commercialisation
in
et dans les meilleures
contractualization,
techniques
and in the
liées à la gestion.
technical
Pour les institutions
aspect. Now,
financières,
let's talk about
il
the
s'agit de
financial
travailler à développer
institution.
des
We
mécanismes
want to
de
develop
financement
some
à
funding
travers les
mechanism
partenariats, à
through
travers le renforcement des capacités,
partnership,
à travers
capacity building,
la
and
mise à
also
disposition des
the
fonds pour financer
availability of some
des
funds.
mécanismes beaucoup plus souples,
Have some
plus
more
accessibles au
flexible
profit de l'ensemble des
mechanism
acteurs et de
to our
développer aussi
various
des
stakeholders.
mécanismes de
We can
chaîne de valeur
also
et de
better
contractualisation qui
develop
puissent
the
permettre
value chain and the
d'avoir des
contractualization
mécanismes d'intervention
mechanism.
moins risqués
Maybe have
permettant
a
d'avoir des financements
try to de-risk
satisfaisants au
the
profit
whole
des
value
producteurs
chain and the
et de mesurer
contractualization.
aussi les
And why
risques
not
et
mobilize
les
the necessary
opportunités avec
resources
potentiel
with
produit.
to support the stakeholders in this industry. So in a nutshell, that's my presentation. Thank you for your
Merci
attention.
beaucoup,
Thank
Monsieur
you,
C.
Mr.
Très
C.
intéressante
Very
présentation
interesting.
qui nous a montré un peu de
You
façon
have
très
given us a
concrète
glimpse
euh, comment
on
ce
how
problème est perçu, le
this
problème du financement
issue
des engrais
is
perçu
conceived
par
by
les
the
banques
commercial
commerciales.
banks.
Très rapidement, nous allons prendre notre troisième présentation et dernière
We are
avant
going
d'ouvrir
to
la
the
séance
third and
de
last
débat.
presentation before we
Il s'agit
start
de Monsieur
our discussion.
Armand
This is
Yoka
coming
de
from Mr.
ATEX
Armand
qui va
Yoka
présenter un
from
mécanisme,
ATES.
un
He's going to
outil
share a
qui a été
mechanism
développé
with
par
us,
Afrexim
a
et l'Union
tool
africaine et des
from
partenaires. Donc,
African Union
Monsieur
and Afrexim Bank.
Armand,
Mr. Armand Yoka, over to you.
voilà. Sa présentation est... Voilà. Monsieur Armand,
Mr.
vous
Armand,
avez la
over to you,
parole pour
please.
présenter l'outil ATEX. Merci.
Merci à vous,
Thank you,
Kido.
Mr.
Merci à
Kido.
tous participants, Monsieur Charles,
Mr.
Monsieur Ayo,
Charles,
pour
Mr.
ces
Ayo, for
présentations qui
your
étaient
presentation.
extrêmement intéressantes
Quite
et qui en réalité
interesting.
m'ont permis de faire une belle introduction
And I can
par
say
rapport
that you
à
set
Tex
the
et ce que
stage for
nous,
my
on
presentation.
a à proposer. Je pense que vous avez
I
très bien mesuré
believe
le
that
problème de
the issue
financement
of funding
que le continent africain et que la
that our
région d'Afrique de
region,
l'Ouest sont en train de
the West
traverser
African region,
en ce moment.
is
Et
going
donc,
through
l'idée
now.
maintenant, c'est
So now my
très rapidement
responsibility
de
is
présenter
very quickly
ATES
to
Africa
introduce
et
ATES
donc
Africa
les quelques
and the
solutions
few
qu'on a essayé
solutions that we came up
très bien
with
avec l'écosystème que
in
l'IATC
considering the
essaie
environment
de créer. Donc, je vais essayer d'être assez rapide parce que je
expected
pense qu'on est pris
by
par le temps. Donc,
IFDC.
si on peut passer à la prochaine
We are lagging
diapositive,
behind time, so let me do
donc
it very quickly.
ATEX
Altes
Africa,
Africa
c'est une
is a
plateforme digitale
digital
qui
platform
connecte acheteurs et
connecting
fournisseurs
buyers
sur le
and
continent africain.
sellers on African
ATEX a
continent.
deux
We
objectifs
have two main
principaux.
objectives.
Le
The
premier,
first one
c'est donc
is to
faciliter
facilitate
la
the
communication entre
relation
les acheteurs
between
et les
the
fournisseurs.
suppliers
Et
and
le
the
deuxième est
buyers.
donc
And
de
number two
combattre
is
la
to
crise
fight
alimentaire
food
que le continent est en train de
insecurity that
traverser
the
en
continent
ce
is
moment.
going through
Et donc,
now.
quand on parle
When
de
we
crise
say
alimentaire,
food
forcément, le sujet
crisis,
des
we
engrais est
know
un
that we
sujet très
cannot
important. Donc,
do
ATEX
a we
a
cannot
été
put a
lancé
blind
par
eye on
Afrexim
the
Bank en
fertilizers.
partenariat
So we
avec
are in partnership
l'UECA,
with
donc la
UNICA,
Commission économique
the
africaine des Nations Unies,
United
le
Nations
secrétariat
Economic
afrique
Commission,
ressources
UNICA, and we
africaines
are also
et
working with
l'Union africaine. Et donc, comme
the
mentionné avant,
continental secretary of
l'idée ici, c'est
AFCFTA.
d'utiliser donc ce
So the
premier
role of
platform qui
this
connecte
digital
acheteurs
platform
et
is to
fournisseurs
connect the
pour faciliter l'achat
suppliers
et
and the
l'importation
buyers,
des
and
engrais,
to
mais
also
surtout,
facilitate the
grâce à
import
nos
of
partenariats,
fertilizers.
réussir à
Through our
proposer de nouvelles
partnership, we have
solutions
been
de
able to
financement
propose some solutions
pour les
toward the
importateurs
funding to the
en Afrique de
benefit of
l'Ouest et en
the
Afrique de l'Est
importers
généralement.
in
Donc, si on
Africa
passe à
generally
la
and
prochaine
West Africa
diapositive,
specifically.
on a pour le moment
Next slide, we have three
disons
solutions,
trois moyens de financement
to
qui sont
fund
présents
the
à travers
various
la plateforme ATEX. Donc,
actions.
est-ce qu'on peut passer à la prochaine
Next slide, please.
diapositive, s'il vous plaît? Merci beaucoup. Donc, ouais, vous voyez, on a trois
We
différents types
have three
de
different
financement.
funding
Premièrement, c'est un
solution. Number
financement
one is a
direct
direct
venant
funding
d'Afrexim
coming
Bank.
from
Donc, c'est une ligne de
Afrexim Bank.
crédit revolving qu'on appelle le ATEX
We
Dual
call
Tranche
it
Trade Finance Facility. Donc, c'est un
ATES
process qui est
Dual
quand même
Tranche
qui prend
Trade
beaucoup de temps parce qu'il
Facility.
y a un gros KYC à faire. Maintenant, c'est une
This
ligne
is an
ATEX
ATES
que
line
l'acheteur pourra
which the
utiliser
actor can use
pour pouvoir
to
importer ses
import
différents
the
produits. Et donc,
various
on
inputs.
passe par un
So you
financement
have a
direct
direct
d'Afrexim Bank
funding from
et
Afrexim
qui
Bank,
utilise aussi donc un
and you
LAA,
have an LAA,
donc un Local
which
Administrative
is the local
Agent,
administrative
pour
agent,
pouvoir
to fund
financer les
the
importations des
imports
fournisseurs, des acheteurs qui
for
utilisent
those
Afrexim.
who
Maintenant,
subscribe
la
to
deuxième
ATES
solution,
services.
qui est
Number
pour
two
moi la solution qui
solution,
est la
which
plus
is the most
intéressante en ce moment même,
interesting
comme M.
to
Charles
my
l'a très
knowledge,
bien
of
expliqué, et
course,
M. Ayo aussi,
as
en ce
Mr.
moment, c'est
My
un
predecessor said,
environnement financier
we
très
have a very
compliqué et
complicated
l'un des
environment.
aspects les
So the
plus
most
importants, c'est la
important
crise de
thing
change et le
is
manque de dollars
uh,
qui
the
est
lack,
en train de
the
traverser le
shortage
continent.
of
Et ce qui se passe, c'est avec les
cash
lignes de
and
confirmation,
also the amount
donc
of transaction being done
travers
in dollars on the
Afreximbank, on
continent.
apporte
So
une
right here we are
solution
bringing a solution
à cette crise de change, étant
based
donné
on
qu'on a
the
la
exchange.
capacité de
Since we have
fournir
the
du dollar
ability
aux
to
banques locales.
supply
Et en
dollars
plus
to
de
the
ça,
local bank,
on a ce qu'on appelle les
we
ATRA
also
FIMIT qui ont
have
été lancés
the
par Afreximbank et les limites
ACTRA
ATEX.
permit.
Ces
This
limites,
is
c'est
some
très
limit.
intéressant.
Why is it
Pourquoi?
that important?
Monsieur Charles, je pense qu'il
Mr.
pourra
Shal
ensuite
may come in later
me supporter
and
lorsqu'on va
complement
être
what I'm talking about
dans
during
la
the
discussion.
discussions.
Les limites ATRAF et limites ATEX permettent aux banques
These
locales de
will
ne pas
help
payer de cash
local
margin lorsqu'ils
banks not to pay
bénéficient
the cash
d'une
margin
confirmation.
when they are
Et donc, ça, c'est très
negotiating
important
a
parce que ça leur
contract.
permet de rendre un
So
peu plus
you
de
have more
flexibilité
flexibility
lorsqu'il est temps
when it's
de
time to
financer les
fund
importations à
the
travers les lettres de crédit. Parce que le cash margin,
imports
c'est assez,
through
si je puis dire,
the
coûteux pour les
credit
banques
letter.
locales. Et donc, nous, ce qu'on essaye
So
de
what
faire,
we
c'est de
need to do
faciliter
is
les choses
to
à ce niveau-là pour
facilitate
ensuite
what
faciliter le
is
financement
being
pour
asked and also
les
facilitate
utilisateurs finaux qui vont
the
pouvoir
access to
bénéficier
the end
de ces lettres de
users,
crédit. Donc,
the end
tout ça
users of
est
the
un peu plus
credit.
court et
So
beaucoup
this
plus rapide
process
parce que
is
on part du
shorter.
principe que l'acheteur,
It's on
que
short-term
l'importateur
basis
a déjà une
because
relation
we know that we
avec sa
only
banque
do that
locale et donc il a
when
vu c'est
the
là
consumer
qu'il a
has a
passé la porte.
relation with
Et donc
the
finalement,
bank.
c'est une dernière
So we
plateforme qui
have a
s'appelle
last
HEG
platform which we
Connect.
call
HEG
HEG
Connect, c'est une
Connect.
plateforme
HEG Connect
digitale de
is a
financement qui
digital
rassemble
financing
toute institution
platform
financière
gathering
qui aide pour le
every
financement
digital
des importateurs en Afrique. Et donc c'est intéressant pourquoi?
actors.
Parce que comme
Why is it that
Monsieur Ayo et
important?
Monsieur
As Mr.
Charles
Ayo
l'expliquaient,
and
il y a
Mr.
beaucoup
Shal
de
said, there
nouvelles
are so
structures de
many
fonds, de nouvelles institutions,
institutions,
de
many
nombreuses années qui commencent
microfinance
à se
that
mettre en place.
are
Et
coming
l'idée,
up.
c'est que tout le monde n'a
So
pas
the
toujours
idea
cette
is to
exposition, tous
be
les acheteurs
visible
n'ont pas toujours cette exposition à ces solutions-là.
and also
Et
allow
donc, nous, dans
the
cette plateforme
consumer
digitale,
to
ce qu'on
have
fait,
access to
c'est
more
qu'on
products.
présente, on met en avant les
So first, we
besoins
would like to put the
importateurs
spotlight
ou les
on the
besoins
needs
financiers
of the financial needs of our
des différents
various
acteurs et
suppliers,
les
for
différentes
instance.
institutions financières ont automatiquement accès à
And
ces
we
datas-là et
also
donc peuvent
have
voir
some
quels sont les deals
data.
pour lesquels ils ont un appétit. Et donc, juste pour citer quelques banques et quelques
Now, just to
institutions qui
name
sont
some
déjà
banks or some
de
institutions
ATG
who
Connect, on a
were
donc
part of
Wema
ATG
Bank,
Connect,
on
we
a
have
EcoBank,
EcoBank, Rena
on a
Bank,
le
we
African
have the
Guarantee
African
Fund,
Guarantee
African
Fund,
Trade
we have
Insurance
African
Policy. Donc,
Trade.
juste pour en citer
Just to
quelques-uns,
name few of
sont
them,
déjà, qui font déjà
they are
partie de cet
already part of
écosystème
this
qui cherche à faciliter
ecosystem,
le
trying to
financement pour les
facilitate
entreprises
the
africaines et bien
funding of
évidemment
the African farmers'
pour les
activities,
utilisateurs d'engrais.
mainly
Donc,
for
juste
the
après, prochaine diapositive,
fertilizers
c'est un
dealers.
petit case
So
study
this slide to
pour le
tell you
deuxième cas de
that
figure. Donc, une
we
confirmation de
is
lettre de
still
crédit.
possible. So the
Ce qui
second
s'est passé donc
the second scenario
pour
is
Tanzanie
with
pour
the
un
confirmation
importateur
through
qui cherchait à avoir
a credit
2500
letter.
tonnes
So
du
we
riz à
had an
6%.
importer who
Et
want
donc,
to
comme vous savez,
have
en Afrique, bien
2,000, more
sûr,
than 2,000
on passe par
tons,
une grosse
more
crise
than
de
12,
temps. Et donc, c'est une solution qu'il a
12,000
réussi à
tons of
apporter
urea.
pour pouvoir faire cette
So
transaction.
he needed
Et donc, c'est
to
passé
have
donc par
more
une
than
étape
$5
numéro 1,
million.
qui est la structuration de la
So first he
transaction,
has the
s'assurer que les
structuration of the
acheteurs et les
funding,
fournisseurs
which
sont
means that
intéressés
the bank
par les
and
détails
the supplier are interested.
tous les
So
détails
they
de la
collected
transaction,
all
y
the
compris
detail on
ensuite
the
la
transaction
présenter
and
à la
they
banque
present it
locale,
to
mais
the
aussi
local bank
à
and
Afreximbank.
to
Et ce qui nous
Afresim
lead
Bank.
à
So
l'étape
this
numéro
leads us
2,
to
qui
step
est la
number two,
structuration du
the
financement. Et là,
structuration
ça
of
passe
the
par deux types.
financing after the
La banque
structuration of the
locale, lorsqu'ils
transaction.
ont l'appétit
So
pour ce
right
type de
here,
transaction,
they may be
vont pouvoir signer
interested in
effectivement ce
funding
qu'on a
such
cité,
transaction
ouvrir une lettre de crédit si jamais
if
ils peuvent
only it's
bénéficier
possible
de
for them
la limite
to
ATRAF ou
get
de la limite
the
ATEX.
ATRAF limit or
Un des plus
ATEX
gros
limit.
défauts, on va dire, de ce financement, c'est que il faut que
The
cet
challenge it
importateur ait
has
une
to
relation.
is only
C'est à
that
ce
you
moment-là que ça
have to
devient
be
beaucoup
in good
plus simple.
relation with the
Mais
bank.
sachez que ATEX, c'est une plateforme qui est présente que depuis fin 2022 et qui est vraiment live que depuis
For late
2023.
November 2022
Et
and
donc
has been
forcément, toutes les semaines,
active
toutes
so
les deux
far.
semaines, on a de nouveaux
Every week we have new
partenariats qui se mettent
partners
en place pour pouvoir aider
that are made in order to
plus de
help
producteurs,
more farmers
d'importateurs
and
sur le
importers
continent
on the
africain.
African
Donc
continent. So
l'étape
the
numéro 3,
third
donc cette
step
négociation
is
avec la
negotiation
banque,
with the bank
parce que bon, il y a
because
toujours certains conflits
we
d'intérêts.
always
Les
have
importateurs vont
some
pouvoir avoir
profit
le plus
of
de taux
interest.
possible.
The
Le
importers
fournisseur
want
va
to
pouvoir
have
avoir
more profit
quelque
as
chose
much
spécifique
as
par
possible.
rapport
So we
au
have this
niveau où la
topic,
banque
how
est prêt à le mettre.
much
Donc,
the
ce n'est
bank
pas ces types
is
de
ready
détails de
to invest.
négociation
So there
qui
are
vont
more
importer. Donc,
investment and
il faut
details,
savoir
I mean negotiations and details between us and the bank in order to know
et donc,
what
à
can
ce
be done.
moment-là, une fois que les
Once
négociations
the
sont terminées,
negotiations
tout
are
ce dont on a
completed,
besoin, c'est
all
un
we need
draft
is a
de
draft of the
crédit
credit letter
présenté
that will be
aux
presented
banques
to the
sur
bank,
Afreximbank
Afrexim
site.
Bank,
Et
and
donc là, on
then
rentre les derniers
we
détails
fine-tune
quant à
the
au
latest
fait de
details
confirmation
relating to the
et quant aux
confirmations,
différents
the
termes
various
liés
provisions relating to the
au financement, donc
financing
à la
and
confirmation
consumption of
de
this
cette ligne de crédit.
letter of credit.
Et donc,
The
l'idée, c'est
idea
vraiment
is
de
actually
bénéficier
to benefit
de
from
l'avantage que
these
sont les atraves
advantages,
et
which are
apex
the
limits,
ATRAP and
qui donnent
APEX,
beaucoup plus de
that give more
flexibilité aux
flexibility
banques
to
locales
local banks
en
in
termes de
terms of
financement.
financing.
Donc,
So the
si
final
j'ai un peu plus
slide
de
is
détails
much
par
more
rapport
details
à ATG Connect, qui
relating
c'est
to
le plus
ADG
intéressant
Connect,
surtout
which is
pour
more
les
interesting for
producteurs, les
our
acheteurs
farmers and
qui sont un peu
purchasers
plus
who are
petits.
smaller. So,
Donc, comme je
like
l'ai
I
dit,
said,
ATG
ATG
Connect, c'est une
Connect is
plateforme
a digital
digitale qui
platform
cherche à
that seeks to
faciliter l'accès
facilitate
au
access to
financement et
financing
aux
and
opportunités de
opportunities of
financement pour,
financing
d'un
for,
côté,
on one side,
les personnes dans
people
le
in
besoin, donc
need,
les
the
entreprises dans le
companies in
besoin de
needs
financement
of
qui
financing
peuvent
that
se
can
registrer
be
à travers
registered
peut-être
and
une
through
part de leur demande.
Apex
Donc, ça peut être
submit
n'importe quelle
the
demande,
request. It
n'importe
can
quel
be
type
all
de
type
demande.
of
Il n'y a pas
demand.
de
There is no
minimum.
minimum.
L'idée, c'est
The
de
idea is to
rassembler le plus de
gather
data
the
possible
greatest number of
pour que
data
les
so that the
institutions
financial
financières sur cette
institutions
plateforme-là
on this platform
puissent y
can
accéder
access it
et puissent
and
voir
see what they
ce qu'elles peuvent
can do
faire pour
to
financer
finance these
ces transactions.
transactions.
Et donc, on peut
So here we're
vraiment
talking
de
about
tout type
all
de
types
deal, du
of
plus petit
deals
au
from
plus
the
grand. Et
smallest
donc,
to the biggest
la
and the
demande
demand
d'accès
and
au
access
financement
to
pour les
financing
acheteurs
for the
est
purchasers
totalement sans
is
frais. Donc,
without
vous
fees.
pouvez
So you can submit
directement
your
via
request
ATG Connect.
directly
Et
through
de là, l'idée,
ATG
c'est qu'il y ait un
Connect.
matching
And if
qui
there
se
is a
fasse
matching
entre
between the
la demande de
demands
l'acheteur et donc
and the
les providers
providers of
de finance.
finance. The
L'objectif
purpose
est
of
juste de
ATG is
rassembler
to
tous les acteurs
gather
financiers et donc
financial
d'agrandir
stakeholders and
l'écosystème
increase the
financier en
financial
Afrique
ecosystem in
et en
Africa
particulier
and
donc
especially
pour,
for
pour les, pour les acheteurs de
for
produits agricoles
fertilizer
parce que,
importers and
comme je l'ai dit,
purchasers
l'objectif
because,
de
like I
l'ATG
said, the
Connect est de
final
combattre
purpose
cette crise
is to fight
alimentaire
this food
et donc
crisis.
le secteur des
And
engrais
the
est très
fertilizer
important
sector is
pour
very
eux.
important for us.
Et
So,
donc,
like
avec
I
cette
said,
plateforme qui
there
est
must be a
multiservice,
matching.
donc elle
I'm
serait
trying
assez
to go
rapide. Je
fast
pense que
because
vous êtes
it's
déjà
already
perdu,
10,
donc je pense que
24,
les discussions vont
10,
reprendre tout
40.
de suite.
And
Donc,
there's a
j'attends vos
discussion
questions
that
avec
we're going to have. So
impatience
I'm waiting
et que
for your
cette
questions
discussion,
with
que cette
in
discussion
patience.
commence. Donc,
So
merci à
thank
vous
you so
pour,
much for
pour
listening
écouter.
to my
Bah, voilà, je
presentation.
pense
Thank you
que
so
c'était assez
much.
rapide.
Merci Armand
Thank
pour
you, Armand. Thank you for
cette
this very
intéressante
good
présentation. Je vois
presentation.
déjà des
I
réactions
can
dans le
see
chat. Ils
reactions
disent
in the
que c'est la
chat
solution.
that say that this is the solution.
Là,
Here, we're
on va
going
ouvrir
to
la séance de
open the
débat. Nous
discussion
avons, avec les
sessions. We
têtes de
have
liste, des acteurs de
players
la
of the
chaîne de
value
valeur,
chain,
Monsieur
Mr.
Zundi
Zundi
et
and
Monsieur
Mr.
Jean
John
Mandé,
Jean
qui sont
Mandé,
des
who
acteurs
are
de la chaîne de
players of
valeur,
the value
à
chain,
qui je
and
vais
to whom I'm
demander
going to ask.
Monsieur
I'm going
Jean
to ask
d'abord.
Mr.
Au
Jean
vu
first.
des trois présentations
In
qu'on
view
a,
of the three
qu'est-ce
presentations
que,
that we have
quelle
had,
est votre
what
réaction?
is your
Est-ce
reaction?
que les
The
problèmes que vous
problems are
présentez,
as
est-ce que
presented
ce sont des
are
problèmes auxquels vous
these
faites vraiment
the
face?
type of
Est-ce
problems
que
that
euh,
you are facing?
tous les problèmes auxquels vous
Are
faites
all the
face ont
problems
été
that you are
présentés? Est-ce
facing,
qu'il y en a d'autres?
have them
Et
been
si
presented? Are there other
vous êtes
problems that have
quand
been
même
that
lancé
have not been
pour faire
presented?
des
Can you
commentaires
make any
sur
comments
les,
on the
discussions
alternative
qui ont
solutions that have
été
been
présentées et
presented
aussi
by the
durant
various presenters,
les congrès?
including
Monsieur
Mr.
Armand,
Amand,
qui a
who
présenté
presented
un
a
outil
tool
extrêmement
that is very
pratique.
practical?
Monsieur
Mr.
John,
John, you have the floor.
la parole est à vous. On va essayer de rester dans 5
We'll
minutes.
try to speak for 5 minutes. Well, thank you so much. The time allocated to me is very limited as DG of Dukoy Partner Agro Industries, which is an importer and that also has a blender in Mali. I'm going to go very straight to the fact on the presentation of Mr. Charles, who actually gave us some clarifications and touched on the problems that we are facing. But I will just add an additional element because when we're talking about the value chain of financing of agricultural inputs, we leave aside an element that causes not only the rising cost of financing and also difficulties to access financing. And what is this element? We are discarding the processors. Here, I'm talking about cotton companies because when you look at the fertilizer and the agricultural inputs that we put on the market, more than 60% is meant for the cotton companies, and it's these same banks that finance the cotton companies. So, in at some point, we have a guarantee because it's the same banks that take the proceed of the sale of cotton for cotton companies. And you are here as a banker cashing flows, and then you see the danger to finance agricultural inputs that will help achieve a better yield for cotton. And I'm saying that it's good for us to try to define a global chain where we'll have at the same time the processors, transformers who are cotton companies, we as importing organizations, and also the farmers. And if everybody gets together in this chain, in this financing system, I think that we'll be able to create, to build trust. Because we are not selling fertilizers to cotton companies without a contract. And if there is a contract, in addition to the third withholding mechanism that has been proposed, I think that access to financing must not be a problem. This is the first observation. This also must help, must allow a financing at very reasonable cost. Let me provide figures. In order to finance inputs, we have interest rates that range from 10 to 12%. For figures, of more than several billions. This will lead to a very high cost of inputs for farmers. We also suggested mechanisms for the bank to connect the agro dealers who are the dealers. This mechanism also is very important. And I think that this is done in our country. This is the sector of crop, of staple crop. In some countries, we have government that support. And what happens? The rice farmers have the subsidy. They come into cooperatives and they go to the bank, they demand the financing, the bank grants the financing, and once they purchase the fertilizer for this bank, they produce rice, and this rice is collected by organizations that purchase it and sells it and pays the bank. This plan has been described by Mr. Charles, which is very good. But the problem with this plan is the deposit requested from the farmers. They are requested to deposit between 10 and 20%, and sometimes even more. Can you imagine a person who has to deposit 20% of like 3 billion or 5 billion? How can they make it? So we have these realities in the field, and currently we have to think about the solution. Another element that is very important that they raised is, and which must be the first solution, is the installation of an agricultural input fund that will allow all the players to come together so that very effective mechanisms are set up. And I think that these mechanisms are at three levels. First, we have the importers who are the blenders, and currently they are using credit letters to purchase from abroad. The second, we have the agro dealers who are purchasing also through the same banks. And the third is the direct consumers. You have the bank and also purchasing centers who, in a very well-defined organization, will make it possible not only to have access to financing, but also to significantly reduce the cost of financing. Regarding the international market, which generally does not depend on us, there is a solution that was proposed that is very good, and it is the intervention of our leaders who can, still in the implementation of this fund, create a global purchasing center. The idea was raised by Obama, where they tries for banks to make group purchases. This will help in reducing purchasing costs and also allow us to have not only products at very reduced cost. Given that my time is very limited, I'm not going to speak any longer. Mr. Chow has allowed us to better understand the existing systems, and these are a few enhancements that we can bring. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. John. I'm sorry for the time that was very limited, and thank you also for kindly complying with your time limit. I will now hand over to Mr. Zondi, who is representing the agro dealers, is the leader of an organization of agro dealers in Burkina Faso. Mr. Zondi, do you want to say anything in reaction to the three presentations?
Merci,
Thank you, Kido.
Bonjour
Thank
tout
you.
le monde.
Good morning, everybody. So, on behalf of the board of directors and all the members of the cooperative society of Burkina Faso, we thank you for the opportunity. So I will present Mr. Kindo and Mr. Aruna Zondi, chairman of the board of directors of the cooperative company of Burkina Faso. We are administrator at the purchasing center of agricultural inputs of Burkina Faso, and we are also a promoter of a blending unit, chemical fertilizer blending unit, and organic fertilizer production unit. Like he said, our time is very limited, but let us go to the essential. I will highlight the tentative solutions that we have been able to trigger to support the farmers in order to reduce the cost of fertilizer and also to have quality fertilizer at an affordable cost, because this is our purpose. Quality fertilizers at affordable prices for farmers. Mr. Charles Seed, thank you so much for your presentation, for also describing the realities that we are facing. I will elaborate more on taxes because, let us say it, even at the Akaima, we are still working with the authority in order to actually reconsider tax connected to the import of fertilizers. Of course, when we're talking about financing, we see banks, financial institutions, but we forget that we are a landlocked country. We do not have any ports. So sometimes the cost of transport up to our warehouses is sometimes higher than the cost of purchasing fertilizer. You have to transport the fertilizer. We have the documentation. We have the Ministry of Agriculture. We have to go there for a technical notice of import. I would like to thank the authorities, the Ministry of Agriculture with our supervisory ministry. So this document, among all the documents that for import, is issued to us locally and at low cost.
Sinon, après l'avis technique d'importation, puisque c'est un produit qui est soumis à une autorisation spéciale d'importation.
Except that the other documents, you have to pay something, the insurance. There are so much documentation that is required. This takes not only time, but has a very high cost. We're talking about costs relating to financing by national institutions, but I think that the advocacy that we are making currently, and we hope that it will be successful. We are asking the authority to take a look at some taxes or even delete or reduce them. This will help us have fertilizers and input at an affordable price and send them to the farmers. What people forget is that we are directly connected to the farmers because when they come, they are they come to us, farmers, I mean dealers. Sometimes when they come, they think that the high cost of fertilizer is caused by us, the traders. They do not have the real information. So we try every time to explain, with the latest events.
l'inflation des prix et tout, mais bon, généralement,
Generally,
ils ne
they do
comprennent
not
pas.
understand.
Donc,
So
si ça peut
if
être
this
revu,
can be
ça va nous
resolved, it
arranger.
will be very
Alors,
helpful to
nous,
us.
je parlais
I
tantôt
was talking
des
about
sociétés
tentative
coopératives
solutions that we have been
opté pour le modèle de
implementing.
la société
We
coopérative.
have
Et je pense que c'est le modèle
this
phare
is
actuellement de
the
soutien
very matter of system
de cette
Africa. We are in the
production,
project.
qui est de travailler
Our
directement
solution
avec
is to work
le
directly
public
with the
cible, les
target public,
producteurs,
which is the
et
farmers,
de mettre à
and make
disposition des
available
intrants
to
au
them
niveau de notre
the fertilizers
politique d'intrants et location, de
and
matériel
the
agricole.
renting
Nous
of
avons
agricultural
confiance à travers
equipment.
l'IFDC, à travers
This
Paris.
service has been provided
Et
through
nous l'avons
the
expérimenté
RDC.
depuis
We have
3
experienced
dernières années
this
et ça
for
marche très
the
bien.
free
Alors,
the
allons-nous
past
la
3 years,
campagne
and it
soit
works
une
very
campagne
well.
de sèche,
So at
une saison
the
pour la
outset of
campagne.
the
Alors, nous
rainy
mettons au
season
niveau des
or
points
in
focaux
any season,
d'injection
we make
un certain nombre
available at
de
the
volumes
focal
d'engrais
points
de qualité
a volume
à
of
disposition
quality
des producteurs de la
fertilizer
région. Je
for
pense que la dernière en
the
date
farmers
était
of the region.
la
I
subvention
think
pour
that what we did, our
mettre
recent
à
action
disposition des producteurs du
was to make
centre-ouest.
available to the farmers in the Central
Grâce
West
à l'ancien
region.
SG du ministère de l'Agriculture, M. Sankara, qui nous a
In this, Mr.
accompagnés
Sankara, whom I
pour
think
le déroulement
has
de ce
assisted us
projet-là, en mettant à notre
by making
disposition
available to us
le directeur
the
régional
regional
et
director
les
and
agents
the
techniques.
technical agent
Et
of
ça a
the
très bien
Ministry of
marché.
Agriculture.
Et nous
It
avons
was
travaillé avec
a
eux
good success. We worked
des
to
engrais
reduce
et
the
les
cost
producteurs
of
étaient vraiment
fertilizer,
satisfaits.
and
Nous avons
farmers were very happy.
demandé plus d'engrais et
We
ils ont
run
été
out of
satisfaits.
stock and they were even
C'est ce que nous
demanding
faisons
more.
et pour cette
This is what
campagne,
we've
nous
been
avons
doing.
choisi
And
6
for this
régions,
crop
c'était nos
season, we
cibles.
have
Et déjà dans
chosen
ces
6
6 régions,
regions.
nous avons
In the
demandé
6
aux
regions, we
farmers
started
l'année passée
last week
à
to
déposer des engrais. Nous
deposit
avons procurer dans
fertilizer.
ces 6
We
régions 500
decided
tonnes
to
d'engrais
make available
NPK 15
MPK
à disposition des producteurs
1515
à un coût de
fertilizer
3000 le sac. Donc les farmers
available
étaient
at a cost
satisfaits
of
et comme nous a dit
33,000 per
le
bag.
hôte, bon,
Like
l'idée, notre
he
souhait c'est que
said,
le prix des
the
denrées
idea
revienne
is
aux
to
environs de
make
12 500
fertilizer
le sac.
available at the
Bon,
price of
les conditions ne sont
30,000
pas
a
faciles, mais
bag
actuellement,
as promised.
dans les 6
So currently
régions-là,
in the 6 regions,
nous avons
we are
déposé
depositing.
déjà il y a 3
We
régions qui ont
have
reçu.
done
Actuellement, nous
this
sommes en
in
train
3 regions.
d'échanger
We are
pour les
now
hauts bassins.
doing
Et
that for
nous
the
continuons
Haut-Bassin region.
avec
This is what we have been
nos
doing
ressources,
with our
nos
meager
petites
resources.
ressources. Nous essayons
We've
depuis
been
3
trying
ans
for 3 years
de voir
now
si ça
to
va
do
marcher
that,
avec
and it
la
works
Fédération
very well.
nationale
We
de
work with the
l'agriculture,
National Chamber
l'Union
of
nationale de
Agriculture, the National
l'ACF,
Association of
ainsi que
Farmers,
les sociétés
the
coopératives de
cooperative
producteurs
Allô?
de
societies
céréales.
of grain
Et
for
voilà.
the
Excusez-moi.
farmers and all these
Excusez-moi.
things.
Allô? Merci,
Thank
merci
you,
beaucoup.
Mr.
Je pense que
Zundi.
nous avons
Tout ça a expiré,
compris
ok, d'accord.
Thank you, Mr. Zundi. We have understood
la
the
situation au niveau
situation
de votre
of your
association.
association.
Et
And
malheureusement, nous
unfortunately,
sommes
we
pratiquement
are
à la
out
fin de
of time.
question
We have
réponse.
come at the end of the
Nous allons
Q&A
très
session.
rapidement, en une minute,
We will
donner
try
la mise en place
to speak on the,
d'un fonds. Ça, c'était plus une remarque qui était
this was an
vous
observation.
intervenir sur la mise en place d'un fonds
on the installation of the funds. We've taken note of it, but we have the question of the rate of interest, which is very high, and that causes higher cost, and the question on deposits that is demanded from the farmers and from the companies that want to have facilities with the bank. So very rapidly, in 1 minute, what Mr. C, can Mr. C elaborate more on this?
Alors, OK.
Thank
Merci
you so
beaucoup.
much, Mr. Kido. Thank
Merci à l'ensemble
you, all
ici
panelists
des intervenants
and speakers
pour
for
ces
these
brillantes
brilliant
présentations.
presentations.
Alors, pour la question
Relating
liée
to
aux
the
deposits qu'on
deposits
sollicite
demanded from
des
the
producteurs.
farmers,
Alors, en fait,
fact,
c'est pour
I
expliquer,
just want to
disons que
say
les
that
institutions
financial
financières
institutions
sont
are
soumises à
subject
une
to a
réglementation
regulation
qui
that
les
compels
oblige
them
soit à prendre des
either
maisons, à
to
prendre des
take
maisons en
deposits
garantie bancaire
or
en crédit
houses in
ou encore
guarantee,
de
or
l'argent qu'on
even cash
dépose
that
peut servir de
deposit that
garantie.
should be
Alors, au
guaranteed.
niveau de ces
When
producteurs-là,
it comes to these
si vous
farmers,
n'avez
if you
pas de
don't know
mécanismes,
have mechanisms,
il faut développer
you
des
have to
mécanismes.
develop
Et quand on développe des
mechanisms.
mécanismes,
And
il faut que
when you
chacun
develop
puisse mettre la main
mechanisms,
dans la pâte.
everybody has to
Alors,
get
avec
involved.
l'IFDC en son
So
temps,
with IFDC, in the
c'était des
past, it was
coopératives, c'est des sociétés
cooperative
coopératives, c'est
companies
des
and
groupements qui
groupings
peuvent
that
compter
could
1000 personnes,
have
souvent 2000
about
personnes,
20, I mean,
que
1,000
IFDC
or
accompagne
2,000
et
members,
il fait la mise en
and
relation avec la
IFDC
banque.
assists them and
Et donc, tous
connects them
ces
with banks.
acteurs qui
Given
n'ont
that
pas de
these are
garantie,
actors that do not
n'ont
have
aucune
guarantees,
ressource
that do not have
financière
any
qu'ils peuvent
financial
prendre afin de
resources,
minimiser le risque.
what can we do in order to
La banque
minimize the
peut
risk
présenter un
or
crédit
present a
bancable vis-à-vis de la
loan
hiérarchie et
request
vis-à-vis
that
de la
is
commission bancaire
is
afin de
bankable
respecter
in
la
order to comply
réglementation.
with the
Et nous, on
regulations?
s'est dit,
So
bon, comme il y a
we said,
l'IFDC
well,
derrière,
given that we have the
tous
IVC
ceux ou tous les
behind,
producteurs
all the
membres de la
farmers who are
coopérative
members of the
qui
cooperative
font, qui
and
demandent
who
le crédit,
need some loan,
chacun
each one of
va
them is
faire
going
un
to
apport de
provide
15%
15%
du
of the
montant de
amount
sa dette.
that is
Alors,
demanding.
si vous
So
demandez
if you want
un
a
crédit,
loan
chaque producteur demande un
of
crédit, genre de
of
20 000 francs,
20,000
il va apporter
CFA, you will provide like
genre 1000 francs, par exemple,
3,000 CFA
pour, comme
as
dépôt, comme
deposit,
sa
which is
contribution
your
dans le cadre de la
contribution
demande
for
de financement. Donc, c'est
the
ce qu'on
request for
faisait.
funding.
Et donc, du
And
coup,
this is what we
quand
used to do.
l'ensemble
And
de ces
when all these
producteurs
farmers
font les
give
apports,
their
on met ça
deposit, we
sur
put
le
it on
compte.
the account,
Et
and
cette
this result
ressource-là est
is
rémunérée, c'est-à-dire il y a des intérêts
generates
qui sont
some
ce
interest
fonds-là produit au profit de
for
la
the
coopérative
cooperative
et
and
des
for the
producteurs.
farmers.
Et quand
And
ils ont
when
fini
they
de faire leur
finish to
remboursement,
pay
ils récupèrent
the
les intérêts,
money,
ils récupèrent le
they take
capital.
the principal
Soit ils
and the
peuvent décider de
interest,
laisser
they can decide to let the money on the account
pour
in
demander
order
un autre
to
crédit.
call
Donc, c'est
for
ces
another
mécanismes comme ça qu'on a
loan.
mis
These
en
are the
œuvre pour pouvoir
mechanisms
les
that we
aider.
put in place in
Et
order to
ces
assist them. And
pourcentages
the
et
percentages
mécanismes
that
de
we
mise
put
en
in
place
place
sont
are
décidés
decided
de concert
in
avec les coopérateurs. C'est
consultations
eux-mêmes
with
qui
the
font la
farmers. They are the
proposition et
ones
on trouve un financement.
making
Voilà, avec
proposals,
l'accompagnement
and we
correct
find a
du
common
bailleur
ground.
aussi.
Of course, with the
Donc,
support
voici ce
of the
que
donor.
je pouvais dire. Maintenant, par
Now,
rapport aux
relating
questions
to the
des
issue
taux
of
d'intérêt,
interest
voilà,
rate,
j'avoue
I have to
que
say that
le taux
the
d'intérêt,
interest rate
effectivement,
is
en tant que financier,
actually
c'est une
high
réalité,
currently,
surtout
mostly in
dans
our
l'espace.
space.
Ça, c'est la
This is a
réalité.
reality,
Mais les taux
but the
d'intérêt
interest
sont
rates are
définis sur la
defined
base
based
aussi des
on the
ressources que vous
resources that
collectez
we collect
sur le
in the
terrain.
field.
Alors, si
So
vous
if
avez
you
de
have
l'épargne
savings,
que vous
time
prélevez
saving
de
that you
vos
use,
clients qui sont très élevés, aussi,
you
vous
have
avez de la ressource que vous devez
resources that
acheter
you have to
sur le
purchase
terrain à des prix
at
qui sont
high
élevés.
cost.
Il n'y a pas
There
de
is no
raison
reason
que ça ne puisse
why
pas
this
se
will
voir
not affect
sur le taux de
the
sortie
output
que vous faites au
rate
profit des demandeurs de crédit. Donc, ce qui
applied
fait
to
que
credit
souvent, les taux d'intérêt sont très
those
élevés.
requesting
Et
credit.
aussi,
This is
souvent,
the
il faut
justification
négocier
for high
avec
rates of credit.
d'autres institutions pour pouvoir
Sometimes
proposer
you
des
have to
crédits et des
negotiate with
financements
other
pour vous mettre à la
institutions in order to
disposition.
mobilize finance to make
Et ces
available
dernières années
for loans.
aussi, notre banque
Over the
centrale
past few years,
a eu des
our central
difficultés
bank has been
est
going
très
through
réticente à
difficulties,
accompagner les
and
banques pour mobiliser
they have
à faire
been
du
very
crédit
reluctant
pour que eux aient
to
accès à leurs
supporting
clients et puissent
banks
faire
with loans so
des
that they
financements.
can actually grant
Donc,
loans.
et le
and
fait que c'est
the
fortement
guiding rate
augmenté
has also strongly increased
de ces dépenses-là.
by
Donc, du coup,
50%.
les banques sont obligées aussi de
So banks are
recruter
obliged to
intensivement
actually
ce fonds-là sur les sites. Donc,
scale
voici
up
un peu
these
ce que je pouvais dire à ce
rates on
niveau-là.
the
Maintenant, il y avait une
beneficiaries. There
troisième
was a
question,
third question.
général Papa Kido, si tu
Kido,
peux
I
me
don't know if you
rappeler
can
la troisième
remind
question
me
là.
of the third question.
C'était pas
It
vraiment
was
une
not really
question,
a question,
c'était
it was a
une question sur
contribution
la mise en
on
place
the installation of the
du fonds d'ajustement
fertilizer
qu'il avait
fund,
salué
which
comme
you
solution.
commended as a
Oui,
solution.
oui, oui, effectivement.
Of
Donc,
course, I
est-ce
think
que
that
ce type
this
de fonds a été mis en place au
was
profit
made
des sociétés
available
cotonnières, ceux qui sont dans le
for
coton? Et comme
the
là-bas, c'est très bien
cotton
structuré,
companies
et je
because
pense
they are
que
very well
il faudrait
structured. And I think
au-delà
that we
des
have to
cultures
go
délirantes, il faudrait
beyond
aussi sur les
the
cultures filières qui
commercial
puissent leur
crop
permettre
and
de mettre en place des
also
fonds
look at the
pour
staple crop
soulager, en tout
in
cas,
order to
pour
put in place
l'accompagnement de
funds
financement
in
des
order
producteurs
to
agricoles et
support
surtout des
the
acteurs qui
players
sont
in
dans
the
la distribution
distribution
ou dans le
or
blending, en tout cas,
blending
des
of
engrais, des engrais.
fertilizers.
Donc, voici ce que
So this
je
was
pouvais dire.
my intake
Voilà.
on this. Thank you so much.
Merci,
Thank you so
merci
much. Thank you
beaucoup,
so much,
merci beaucoup,
Mr.
Monsieur
Sie.
Sier. Là, nous sommes
Here we
à la
have
fin
come to
des
the
réponses
end.
et
We have
malheureusement,
not
le temps
seen
passe vite.
time.
Nous sommes
We have
arrivés à
come
la
to
fin
the end of
de ce
webinar.
webinaire.
Very
Présentement, nous
rapidly, we
avons
have
vu
seen
avec
with
Monsieur
Mr.
Ayo
Ayo in the beginning
les
the
problèmes
structural
structurels
problems
et
and
les
some
pistes
tentative
de solutions
solutions
que,
that
qu'il
he
a fait.
has
Nous avons vu le
offered. We
modèle
saw the
d'avance,
model
on
of
a vu le
grants,
modèle
we saw the
des
model of
garanties,
guarantees.
nous
We
avons
have
le modèle du fonds pour les
for
engrais ou
fertilizer
le fonds pour la
or
santé des
for
sols,
soil
qui est un
health,
modèle qui est
which is a
revenu
model that
dans la
came up
présentation de M.
repetitively in the
Sier, qui a
presentation of
aussi
Mr. Xie,
parlé
who
des
spoke
mécanismes
about existing
existants.
mechanisms
Et à
that
l'absence
were
de la présentation de
in
M.
favor of
Ayo,
Mr. Ayo's
mais
presentation,
nous avons vu
but we
aussi
also saw
les
that there
limites
are very
importantes
important
à ce que les
limits
banques
to what
commerciales peuvent faire toutes
commercial
seules, du fait de la réglementation qui souvent les oblige
compels
à
them
mettre
to
des
put
conditions
in place very
difficiles
difficult conditions
au
for
crédit
credit,
et
and
aussi
also
du fait
the,
du coût
the
élevé
high cost
auquel ils
to
trouvent de
at which
l'argent.
they
Donc,
find
de fait,
money,
cet argent sera
and
plus
they
rendu,
have
donc
to sell it
prêté à
at
des taux
a
beaucoup plus élevés.
highest cost.
Donc, ce
So
sont
these
des
are
réalités que nous
realities
avons
that
vues
we
sur le
are seeing
terrain.
in the
Aussi, il y a
fields.
le
We
mécanisme
also have the mechanism
de ATEX
of
qui vient
which
non
can
seulement avec une mise en
with
relation
connection
entre acteurs,
between
mais
players,
aussi avec
but
du
also with
financement qui
financing
prend en
that
compte
encompasses
les besoins
the needs
de Forex,
uh,
et donc
uh,
de monnaie étrangère,
equity
qui
in
répond au
foreign
mécanisme
exchange.
et qui
And these
facilite
facilities
l'acquisition du
they are
crédit
of
avec
credit,
Afrexim Bank qui
which is
vient derrière.
behind.
Donc,
So
c'est un peu
this
assez
is very briefly
rapidement
speaking
ce que nous avons
what
vu
we've
dans
seen
cette journée.
today.
Nous aurions
We
souhaité
will have
prendre questions du public,
we do want
mais
to take questions from the audience,
nous sommes
but
limitants.
we are
Pour
short
les
of time.
prochaines
For the
étapes
next
à la
steps
suite de ce
after this
webinaire-là,
webinar,
de ce webinaire,
we
nous proposons
suggest
de
to
lancer
have
d'autres webinaires
other
portant
such
sur la même
webinars
question,
on the same question,
peut-être
maybe
avec d'autres
with
acteurs.
other
On a entendu
players.
parler
We heard
du
about the
rôle de
role
l'État,
of
du rôle
the
des
states or
banques
the
privées.
development banks.
Donc,
So
nous
we
proposons
suggest
d'avoir des
to
échanges
have
du
such
même genre, sûrement
exchanges
plus de
with
temps
more
pour les échanges vu
time
que
for discussions,
cette présentation, cette séance était vraiment
given that
introductive, mais
this was
il y a
just an
énormément de temps.
introductory
Donc,
session
restez
focused on
connectés.
presentations. So
Nous
please stay
reviendrons vers
connected.
vous
We'll
avec
reach out to
les
you
dates
with new dates
de ces événements.
for the event.
Voilà. Aussi,
Also,
nous
we
aurons
will have
un
a
questionnaire
questionnaire that will be shared.
Qui sera
It will be
partagé
shared in
dans
the
le
chat
chat et aussi dans
and
les
in your
commentaires. Nous sommes
emails for those who
62.
are connected. and they'll be allowed to come and ask questions and tell us what has not worked for this webinar, and we will thus move forward. The team is telling me, is asking me to allow a few members to say something. I fear that it will not be possible, but I'm going to give the floor for the closing statement to Mr. Malik, who proceeded with the opening, and then Mr. Yule, who is the project head. They are going to make their closing statement. Mr. Malik.
Alors,
Well, good
tout le
morning,
monde.
everybody, again. Thank
Merci,
you,
Guido,
Kido,
de
for
m'avoir
giving me the
d'avoir la
floor
fin
at
du
the
webinar.
end of the webinar.
Alors, euh, je tiens à
Well, I wish
remercier quand
to
même
thank
l'ensemble
all
des
the
participants
participants,
et bien
and of
entendu
course,
nos
our
amis de la
friends
banque,
of the
nos
bank
amis
and of
d'Afex.
Atex
Au niveau
in
d'Afex Bank,
Afrexim
mais
Bank, but
également
also
nos
our
amis de
friends of
FDC
FDC,
et bien
of
entendu
course,
Ayo
Ayu,
qui a une
who
bonne cartographie
had a very good mapping
de
of
la
the
situation
current
actuelle.
situation. And like I
Juste à
said
l'entame
on the outset,
du webinaire, nous
we
sommes
have
venus
come here today
écouter,
to
apprendre
listen
qu'est-ce qui
and
se
hear
fait,
what
qu'est-ce qui
is
est possible
done and what
et
is possible, and
éventuellement comment
possibly
est-ce que
how
les
the
membres de
members of
WAFA
WAFA
sont bien
are
entendu disponibles
available
pour
to
aller vers, on va
move
dire,
towards
l'utilisation
the
de ces
use
nouvelles
of these
méthodes-là.
new methods.
Nous
We
avons un
have
membre
an
également de
eminent
WAFA qui
member
a
of WAFA
participé
who took
en la
part in the
personne
webinar,
de
who
DPA,
is
en la personne
Mr.
de John.
John. We
Nous
know,
connaissons bien
of
entendu
course,
nos
our
difficultés,
challenges,
les
the
difficultés des
challenges of the
banques,
members
donc en tout cas
and
des
the
acteurs privés
private players who
qui évoluent dans le
are
secteur des engrais.
operating in the
Les problèmes
fertilizer sector in West
sont
Africa.
multiples et
There are
diverses.
multiple and varied.
L'objectif, c'est de
Our
comprendre quels
goal is
sont
to
les
understand
moyens
the means
pour
that we
pouvoir
have
passer outre
to
ces
overcome these
difficultés-là. Parce
challenges.
qu'en
Because
réalité,
in
ce n'est pas
reality,
simplement
it's
sur
not
les
just
méthodes pour
about
financer
methods to
l'achat
finance
d'intrants,
the purchase
mais il va sans
of
dire
inputs,
que
but
pouvoir
in
mettre
order
en
to
place la
put in place the
possibilité de faire des
possibility of
formations pertinentes
conducting
au niveau des producteurs et
training,
des utilisateurs, c'est quelque
training
chose qui
for
va
the
amener ces
users and
populations-là à
fertilizers.
utiliser, bien
This
entendu,
will
les
help
engrais de
them
façon raisonnée et
use
responsable.
fertilizer
Donc,
in
il
a
ne s'agit pas simplement
responsible
de
way.
financer
So it's not all
l'acquisition
about
d'engrais ou
financing the
l'acquisition,
acquisition of
on va dire, des
fertilizers
ressources ou
or
des ressources
infrastructures
liées aux
connected
engrais,
to
mais c'est tout un
fertilizers,
tas,
but it's
c'est
a
tout un
whole
écosystème qui a
ecosystem
besoin
that needs to
d'accéder à des
access
financements
financing
dont les
uh,
objectifs, bien entendu, sont
with
divers et
very
variés. Il ne
diverse
s'agit pas simplement que
objectives.
de
It's not
l'acquisition.
just supply.
Donc,
So
j'aurais
I
aussi
would
aimé,
have
bien
appreciated.
entendu, avec
I
l'intervention
love
de
the
nos amis
interpretation
de
of
la
the
banque,
intervention of our friends from the bank.
peut-être nous donner,
Maybe could
après, bien
have given
entendu,
us
comment dirais-je, sa présentation. On aurait aimé avoir des
the
résultats ou bien
outcomes
des
or
exemples concrets
practical
de ce qui a
example
pu
of
se
what
faire un
has
peu
been done
dans les
in the
différents
model,
secteurs
because
afin
we
de
saw
montrer à
that
ce
the
niveau.
model is
Et puis,
quite
bien entendu,
interesting
aussi
and
de réalité locale
encompasses
au niveau
local
du
realities in
Burkina.
Burkina Faso.
Euh, il y a
We,
aussi, j'ai
I
aussi un
also
point pour lequel
have
nous pensons
a
en
point
WAFA que
for which we
effectivement c'est très
think it's
important, ce
very
sont les
important.
barrières
It's
transfrontalières
transnational
dont
borders.
Ayo parlait.
Ayo was talking about,
Effectivement,
of course.
nous sommes
We
une
are
association
a regional
régionale
association
avec bien entendu
with a
un siège
headquarter in
enregistré à
Bamako,
Bamako, mais
but
qui
we are
recouvre, on va
working
dire, la
for the
filière
umbrella
bancaire de la région
organization
ouest africaine.
throughout
Donc,
the
vous voyez,
West
par exemple,
African
le
region. So we
Burkina,
have
le
understood
Burkina qui
that
passe par
Burkina
le
Faso
port
that uses the
de la
port
Côte
of
d'Ivoire,
Burkina Faso
le
or
Côte d'Ivoire,
Ghana,
le Mali qui
Mali
est la
that
même
does the
chose, qui passe par
same.
le port de Dakar, qui
There
sont des
are
acteurs
major
majeurs
players in
dans
the
la consommation
consumption
des
of
engrais
agricultural
agricole,
inputs.
ont
They
besoin de
need
cette
this
synergie-là
synergy of
avec,
actions
bien entendu, les
with the
parties des zones
parties
portuaires
or the
pour
coastal countries
permettre à ce
in
que
order
cet engrais-là
to
soit
make sure
accessible
that
au last
these
mile, comme on l'appelle
fertilizers
dans
are
le jargon. Je
accessible
voudrais
at
simplement
last
terminer en
mile.
disant que
I want to wrap
nous
up
avons
saying
donné, nous
that we
avons
have
vu
noted that
des
there are
éléments
elements of
de réponse, nous
answers.
avons vu qu'il y
There
avait
are
des
ongoing
difficultés.
projects.
Ce que
What we
nous
would like to
aimerions, c'est que,
see
en tout cas,
is
quand il
that
s'agit
when
de
it
faire
comes
participer
to getting the
certaines
private
entités,
sector
nous avons,
involved, you have a
vous avez
voice, you
WAFA,
have
West African
WAFA,
Fertilizer Association, l'association ouest africaine des engrais, qui ont au minimum un membre
who
dans le
have
maximum des
at least
pays
one
de l'Afrique
member
de l'Ouest
in most countries in West Africa.
la CEDEAO. Donc, nous restons disponibles.
So we remain
Nous
available. We want to
participons déjà
get
à certaines
involved. We are
activités
involved in
avec
some activities with
nous sommes
AXM Team
bien
Bank. We
informés
are well
avec ces
informed of
réunions. Nous avons pas mal
ATEX. I think we have quite many members
en Écosse à
already
la maison.
connected in the
Nous
platform.
demandons aussi aux
We're
banques
also asking the
bien
banks to
entendu,
participate in
aux
our
activités
activities
parce que vous
because you're
allez
going to
trouver
have
ces
all
mêmes
the same
personnes-là qui
people
ont
who
ces
have
besoins-là
of
de financement et
financing.
qui ont peut-être aussi des options sur lesquelles vous pouvez travailler avec elles. Je remercie enfin, bien entendu, notre partenaire historique
I
FDC
also thank
qui a
our
aidé
technical
dans le
partner,
projet Engrais. Et
IFDC, and our
j'espère
financial
que
partner,
nous allons pouvoir
USAID.
continuer ce
So I
débat
believe
dans
this
les
kind of
semaines à venir.
discussions is
Et en tout
going
cas,
to
l'objectif, c'est
continue in the
de trouver des
future.
solutions
Anyway,
concrètes
our
au
aim
niveau
is to
du
find
moment
solutions for our
pour
members.
financer, parce qu'à la fin de la
How do
journée,
we make them
tant qu'il n'y
access
aura pas
the financing?
on va dire,
Because as long
accessible
as we don't have
pour
a
les
flexible or
secteurs, que ce soit
easy
donc du
financing
au niveau de
mechanism for
l'approvisionnement
the
ou au niveau
industry
même des
is going
transformations,
to
de la dissémination
undermine
et tout ça,
the
on ne pourra
production
pas
and even the
significativement
procurement.
améliorer
So
notre
we may
situation.
not be able
Je remercie
to
toute l'équipe
get
qui sont
advantage
disponibles
on the
aujourd'hui.
use of fertilizer. Thank you, and thanks to the whole team.
Merci,
Thank you,
Valérie.
Mr. Malik.
Merci à
Thanks
Wafa.
to Wafa.
Je vais appeler maintenant
I'm
Dr.
going to
Yul
invite Dr. Yol
pour son
for
mot
his
de fin.
closing remarks.
Merci, Kido. J'espère que
Thank
vous
you,
pouvez
Kido.
m'entendre. Alors, donc, comme mot de fin, je ne vais pas être très long. Je suis un chef de projet plus que comblé parce
I
que
am
quand on
more than
regarde un peu la
satisfied,
participation,
COP,
on a atteint
because
100
right here
participants,
we
100,
even
200
got
personnes à la base.
200
Ça, c'est quand
participants.
même une
So it's more
satisfaction
than a
et on a noté
satisfaction.
aussi parmi les
Among the
participants
participants, we
beaucoup de la
also
région de la
have
CEDEAO et
UMOA,
notre bailleur,
ECOWAS,
l'USAID, qui était fortement
and
représenté.
USAID,
C'est un
highly
motif de
represented.
satisfaction.
These
Et tous les
are
autres partenaires
this
régionaux
make
pour nous.
you just made my day.
Je ne reviendrai
So
pas sur les techniques parce que vous avez bien
you
résumé ça, Kido et aussi
s- you
Malik.
summarize
Et
the
pour
various
répondre
techniques.
en un mot
So
à ces
in a short
séminaires,
word,
à ces webinaires
in this
virtuels,
webinar,
oui,
we can say
il y a
that
des
yes,
solutions.
there are
Et
solutions
s'il y a des
available.
solutions, alors
So if
prenons-les
there
pour
are
les mettre en œuvre.
solutions, let us
Donc, je pense que
implement them.
dans les
I
jours
believe
à
that in the
suivre,
coming days,
l'équipe du
the
projet va
project
travailler de
team
manière
will
à
work
rencontrer tout
and
ceci et
draft a
à le
report
ramener à
and
un
bring
niveau
it
où il sera
to
plus
a
digeste,
level,
plus applicable,
break
où
it
en tout cas
down
les gens pourront voir les
to the
solutions qui ont
various
été
stakeholders
proposées
for
en
them
dehors
to
des
see the
expérimenter.
solutions and
Je
how
crois que
to
c'est ce que nous allons
implement
faire
them.
dans les
These are
prochains
what we are
jours.
going to do in the
Merci
coming
encore une
days.
fois sur la
Once again,
participation. Je dis merci
thank you so much. It was a
participation. Il y a plus de
success
18
because
pays.
we have
S'il
more
vous plaît, il
than
y avait la
18
RDC,
countries. We
l'Algérie et
have
d'autres pays
Russia,
qui sont encore sur le zone. Ça, c'est
DRC,
vraiment des
and
motifs de
Morocco.
satisfaction. Les
So we
universitaires
also
ont
have the
participé,
academia,
beaucoup de
they
partenaires. Donc,
participated.
encore une
So
fois,
many partners.
merci à tous ceux qui ont
Thanks
pris
to
part.
all the
Merci pour votre temps.
participants. Thanks for
Merci
your
les
time.
panélistes
And also
pour
big thanks
l'expertise
to
que vous
the
avez
panelists
partagée. Et
for
merci aux
your
organisateurs, à toute
expertise
l'équipe
sharing.
d'Engrais.
And
Merci
thanks
aux
to the
partenaires,
Angre team
mais
and
aussi
thanks
aux
to
autres parties
the
IFDC parce que
various
nous avons
partners
le
and
soutien
also
du projet
IFDC
AFOP.
team.
Donc, c'est sur ces mots que
So
je
based
souhaite
on
vraiment
that,
un
I
bon
wish
retour
you
à tous
um,
et bientôt pour donc partager les rapports
a nice
et
day.
les
And
takeaways
also very soon we'll be
bientôt.
sending the report to share
Bye
the
bye.
takeaways with you. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Yul Sanson, pour
Thank
ces mots
you,
de
Dr.
clôture.
Yul
Merci
Samson.
à toutes et à tous
Thanks
pour
to
votre
all ladies and
participation.
gentlemen.
Nous vous prions de
Once
jeter un coup
again,
d'œil dans
make sure
le
that
chat. Nous
you
avons mis un lien
take a look in the
pour
chat
un
box.
formulaire
We send
que nous
you
vous
a
prions
link
très
to the
gentiment
form.
de bien
So
vouloir
kindly
remplir pour nous donner vos
fill in the
impressions par
form
rapport à ce que vous avez
to give
suivi.
us your impression
Merci
on what
infiniment une fois
we
encore
have
pour
shared
toute
with
la
you.
richesse que
And
vous
thanks
avez
to
apportée à ce
all
webinaire.
the
Avant
riches
de
that we have.
décrocher, je vous
Thanks.
prierai, je vous prierai
Before
infiniment
we
d'ouvrir
close,
sa caméra
I would like to
une
ask
image
anyone
d'ensemble,
to
s'il
switch
vous
on
plaît.
their camera for us to have a
Merci de
group
cliquer votre
photograph.
caméra,
Thank you.
s'il vous plaît, pour
Kindly
qu'on puisse
switch on
faire une photo d'ensemble.
your camera, please.
Voilà, on n'y est pas encore totalement. Tout le monde n'a pas encore ouvert la
Kindly
caméra,
switch
mais
on
un
your
petit,
camera, please.
Samuel Foulibas, s'il vous plaît. Encore un peu d'effort et puis ça sera bon. Apparemment, il y a des gens qui ne nous entendent pas. Alors, Agri Digital, c'est bon pour vous? On peut y aller pour la photo?
Oui, c'est bon, allons-y.
OK, merci beaucoup à tous et on se dit à
Thank you
bientôt
and
pour
see you
un
very
nouveau
soon for
webinaire.
another
Merci beaucoup
webinar.
pour
Thank
votre
you for your
participation très
participation, for this
enrichissante.
insightful experience sharing. Thank you.